Chapter 4:14. Old Sun looked at Advisor Chen and said faintly, "I'm sorry, Advisor Chen. If you have anything to say, you should speak to our boss." The theater still had a long way to go. He would never let his blood, sweat, and tears be destroyed in the hands of others. Of course, not only would he not agree, but young Surly would not agree either. "Who is your boss?" Advisor Chen asked with a frown. Old Sun pointed in the direction of the door. "That's him." Advisor Chen turned his head and looked at the young man walking in. He was slightly startled. He didn't think that the boss of the theater, which was almost everywhere in Qingyan Prefecture, would be so young. In his shock, he didn't notice that the two bailiffs standing beside him became excited when they saw the young man. "I don't care who is in charge here. My boss has condescended to host a banquet at Drunken Fragrance Tower tonight. He has invited some merchants like you. Remember, this is your last chance," Advisor Chen said coldly. He then turned to the two bailiffs and said, "Let's go." It wasn't until a long time after he left the theater that he felt something was missing. He looked around and found that the two bailiffs who were supposed to be following him were gone. "Sir, you're back." The two bailiffs immediately walked to Li Yi's side and said excitedly the moment Advisor Chen walked out of the door. Li Yi looked at the two and smiled. "Danny Wei Chong, I haven't seen you in a few months. You two seem to have regressed." Danny laughed awkwardly. Ever since Sir Lu left, County Magistrate Wei only used his own confidants in the county government. The days of old bailiffs like them were not good. During this time, bailiffs Danyu and the others have helped us a lot. Otherwise, our days would have been even more difficult before Sir returned, Old Sun said with a smile. It's only right. Danyu rubbed his head and smiled. "I was thinking of quitting this lousy bailiff position and finding a job here. It's better than being bullied in the county government." All right. If you don't want to be a constable, do you think your wife will forgive you?" Li Yi waved his hand, sat down on the chair next to him and said, "Just in time. Tell me what's going on with that Lord Wei. What's the situation in the county government now?" No one knew these things better than Danyu and the others. Danyu stepped forward and immediately said, "This is Sir Wei. He came here after Sir Lu was transferred to the capital to be a high-ranking official. I heard that he used to be an official in the capital, but I don't know what kind of official he was. Usually his eyes are on his head. Even Magistrate Wang and Secretary Jing didn't look him in the eye. Magistrate Wang was very sad. He was so sad that he couldn't even taste his favorite tea. He was healthy, his children were filial, and his married life was harmonious. The only thing that could trouble him was his career. 2 months ago, on a sunny day like today, he and Magistrate Lu had rare leisure time. They drank tea and chatted in a secluded place in the back of the government office. Anxi County had become a model for all the counties in Qingyan Prefecture and even the whole country. Even the imperial court had praised it. As parents and magistrates, they naturally gained a lot of credit. The two of them, who originally didn't have much hope for an official career, couldn't help but feel a little ambitious as they chatted. He still remembered County Magistrate Lu's high-spirited appearance that day. At that time he had even flattered him. It was probably because County Magistrate Lu's forehead was full of vigor and his glabella was shining. In the future, his career as an official would definitely prosper, and he would not waste his life in the position of Anxi County Magistrate. Before the two of them finished their cup of tea, a yamen runner came to report that the imperial court had sent an urgent document. What happened after that could be described as a twist and turn of events. Magistrate Lu was really promoted. The Anxi County Magistrate inexplicably became the capital magistrate. It seemed that they were both county magistrates, but there was a huge difference between them. Although Anxi County was also a superior county, the Anxi County Magistrate couldn't be compared with the capital magistrate in terms of rank, status, and future. One could only drink tea and chat in a place 800 miles away from the capital, while the other entered the real center of power in this country. Many people said that one couldn't be a capital magistrate for 3 lifetimes, which meant that one could only be a capital magistrate if he didn't practice morality for 3 lifetimes in a row. It was like saying that the grapes were sour. Whoever believed it would be an asshole. Although County Magistrate Wang was envious of County Magistrate Lu, he was still a little happy in his heart. After all, in Anxi County as the second in command, he was only half a rank lower than Magistrate Lu. Of course, those big shots in the magistrate's office were not included. Generally speaking, when Magistrate Lu left, he could also move up a bit. Although it was only half a rank, he was still a top official, wasn't he? However, Magistrate Wang didn't receive an imperial edict from His Majesty, but County Magistrate Wei came. County Magistrate Lu became County Magistrate Wei, but Magistrate Wang was still the same Magistrate Wang. What made him even more depressed was that County Magistrate Wei was transferred from the capital and seemed to be very familiar with a big shot in the magistrate's office. He had only been here for 2 months, but he already had the absolute initiative in the county government. He and Secretary Zheng were completely powerless, and Magistrate Wang was even more leisurely than before. Dog official. Magistrate Wang spat. After taking a sip of tea, he heard a voice coming from behind. Sir, the tea is cold. Do you need another cup? Boo. Magistrate Wang spat out all the famous tea that he usually didn't bear to take out. He turned around in panic. When he saw the person standing behind him, he scolded angrily, "Bastard, when did you come here?" "Just when Sir scolded me as a dog official." Dinyo scratched his head and said with grievance. Then he showed an interested expression and said, "Sir, who were you scolding just now?" "I was scolding myself." Magistrate Wang's little heart was still pounding. He kicked Dinyo's butt hard and said, get out, get as far away from me as possible. Don't let me see you again." "Just scold County Magistrate Wei. Everyone in the county government knows that you always scold County Magistrate Wei behind his back," Dinyo muttered and said as he walked back. "I came to tell Sir that Sir Li is back. He also asked about the county government today. I said that Sir and Secretary Zheng's situation is not very good. Sir Li said that since we are colleagues, he should help them if they have any difficulties while he is still in Qing and Prefecture. Since he didn't, I'll go and tell Sir Li now." "Get out if you don't get out." Seeing Dinyo muttering, Magistrate Wang just scolded him. Suddenly he seemed to think of something and asked, "What did you say? Sir Li is back? Which Sir Li?" "But Sir is no longer a county lieutenant now. Even if the two of us joined hands, we can't defeat County Magistrate Wei. Forget it." Dinyo muttered to himself and then shook his head. He was about to leave Magistrate Wang's sight. County Lieutenant. Could it be County Lieutenant Li? Hearing this, Magistrate Wang's eyes lit up. Looking at Dinyo's disappearing back, he rushed up like an arrow. Come Dinyo, taste this tea." Magistrate Wang poured a cup of tea for Dinyo and patted his shoulder. He said with a smile, "You have been a constable in the county government for a long time. I remember that you were already here when I was just transferred to Anxi County. Dinyo, tell me honestly, how do I usually treat you?" Seeing Magistrate Wang uncharacteristically stroking his shoulder with one hand, Dinyo took a few steps back and suddenly thought of a rumor that all the runners in the county government knew. It was said that Magistrate Wang and County Magistrate Lu often did some shameful things in a room in the back office. It was not a big news that Magistrate Wang had a fetish for men. Thinking of this, he immediately covered his chest with his hands and said in horror, Sir, don't do this. I won't obey you even if I die." Chapter 4:15. Did Lord Li really say that? Magistrate Wang pretended to be calm as he looked at Dinyo, but he was actually very nervous. Others might not know about his former colleague's magical powers, but how could he not know? He might not be able to fight against the new prefectural magistrate, but County Magistrate Wei. Who was County Magistrate Wei? Dinyo scratched his head and said, "Not necessarily. Perhaps I misunderstood. Lord Li actually didn't mean that." Magistrate Wang's eyelids twitched. If he didn't have something to ask him, he would have kicked him. He forcefully suppressed his urge to kick him and said, "What did Lord Li say? Tell me everything without missing a word." What Dinyo said next would determine whether he could turn over a new leaf in the future and whether he could resist County Magistrate Wei's dictatorship. The serfs could turn over and sing. Whether they would live standing or die kneeling. In short, this was the only light he could see at this moment. After a while, Magistrate Wang nodded with satisfaction. He touched his beardless chin and said, "Go find Registrar Zheng and tell him that I have something important to discuss with him. Then go to Intoxicated Fragrance Restaurant and book a table for tonight's banquet. By the way, send an invitation to Magistrate Li's mansion." Dinyo nodded and asked, "Find Registrar Zheng, book a banquet, send an invitation. Is that all? After you're done with these things, go pick up the manure water in the latrine of the county government office. Magistrate Wang turned around and walked back to his room. When he reached the door, he stopped and said indifferently, Pick up the manure water?" Hearing this, Danyo's expression immediately changed. In a room at the back of the Anxi County government office, a slightly plump middle-aged man sat on a chair and flipped through a book on the table. Advisor Chen hurried over from outside. After knocking on the door, he entered the room and said respectfully, "Lord, I've informed all those people." "All of them?" County Magistrate Wei Dupeng raised his eyelids and asked, "What did they say?" Advisor Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry, Lord. If they're smart, they'll know what to do." County Magistrate Wei looked out of the window and said indifferently, "I'm just afraid that they're not smart." Advisor Chen laughed sinisterly. "If they're not smart, we'll make them smart." As if remembering something, County Magistrate Wei asked again, "Have you been to that theater?" "My lord, I've already informed them," Advisor Chen immediately replied. He raised his head to look at the county magistrate with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand why the county magistrate was so concerned about the affairs of those lowly actors. Shouldn't the most important thing now be striking while the iron is hot and establishing his prestige among the rural gentry of Anxi County so that he could gain a firm foothold here? County Magistrate Wei saw his advisor's confusion, but he was too lazy to explain. Although he still regarded those actors as untouchables, untouchables also had their own uses. At least the current public security situation in Anxi County was inextricably linked to them. As the county magistrate of Anxi County, how could he allow such power to fall into the hands of others? Nowadays, Anxi County was a paradise for most of the officials. Every year, the imperial court would inspect the county and place it at the top of the list. This was a great thing for the officials in the county. If they stayed here for a few years, they would be able to advance further and officially step into the center of power in this world. For example, he had coveted the position of his predecessor, the capital magistrate, for a long time. "Has that kid been well behaved recently?" County Magistrate Wei asked again. Although he usually didn't discipline his son much, he had just arrived at Xianxia Prefecture. In the prefectural city, there were countless people that even he couldn't afford to offend. That kid thought that he could do whatever he wanted after coming to Xianxia Prefecture from the capital. He had caused a few troubles for him previously, and now that he had yet to gain a firm foothold here, he had to be kept in check. The young master has been much more well-behaved these days, but he has been loitering around the brothels a little. He seems to have some interest in a famous woman in Xianxia Prefecture. Before Advisor Chen could finish, County Magistrate Wei waved his hand and interrupted him. Loitering around the brothels was nothing. As for the woman he liked, if her family was clean, he could even bring her back as a concubine. County Magistrate Wei had never cared about such things. As Advisor Chen walked out of the room, on the other side of the prefectural city, Yang Liuqing, who was cleaning the courtyard and thinking about what her master had said, suddenly raised her head and looked at the skinny young man who had just walked in. "Li is," the young man said loudly. When he saw the young girl in the courtyard, his eyes immediately widened and he swallowed the words he wanted to say. "What is it?" Yang Liuqing frowned slightly. The young man's gaze made her feel very repulsed. If he hadn't come to find her martial uncle, she would never have let him take a step into this courtyard. "Ah, this lady is." The young man walked over with a smile. Yang Liuqing's eyebrows raised and she said, "If you have something to say, hurry up and say it. If you don't want to say it, then scram." As the #1 follower of the county magistrate's son, she followed him in and out of the brothels all day. She had seen all kinds of beautiful girls, but none had dared to speak to her with such an attitude. The young man's face darkened and he said, "Do you know who I am? Even that Li doesn't dare to speak to me like this." Originally, Yang Liuqing was still hesitating, but after hearing the young man's words, she finally stopped thinking. She picked up the broom and walked over. The young man crossed his arms and swept his gaze impudently over Yang Liuqing's body. He smacked his lips and said, "Oh, this little beauty has quite a temper." His impudence didn't last long. Not long after, a scream came from the courtyard and a figure directly flew out of the courtyard. The young man rolled on the ground for 3 to 5 feet. His clothes were torn and his face was even more unrecognizable. He got up from the ground and wiped the blood from his nose. When he was about to curse, a broom flew out and fiercely hit his chest. The young man fell to the ground again. This time he didn't dare to stay any longer and he hurriedly crawled away. Yang Liuqing silently walked over, picked up the broom and walked back to the courtyard without saying a word. These days there were many people who came to find her martial uncle. At first she was polite and welcomed a few people in. Later her martial uncle said that if anyone came in the future she could just use the broom to drive them out. However, she was worried that if she drove the wrong person away, it would delay her martial uncle's important matter. In the end she didn't do it. Now it seemed that it was better to do as her martial uncle said. There was another more important thing. Should she also go out of the city to compete with people? These days she had been improving rapidly. If she was lucky she might be able to squeeze into the bottom of the heaven list. Her hands unconsciously swept the ground until another figure appeared in front of the door. What happened? When Li Yi saw Dinyo he was holding his butt and crying softly. Of course, Dinyo couldn't tell him that he was beaten by a woman with a broom. He hurriedly handed over an invitation and said, "Sir, this is what Magistrate Wang asked me to send. He and Registrar Zheng are waiting for you at Drunken Fragrance Tower tonight." So urgent? Li Yi took the invitation and said, "It seems that Lord Wang and Lord Jing don't seem to be doing well. Go back and tell them that I will go on time." "Sir, then I will go back first." Dinyo rubbed his butt and thought about whether this could be counted as a work injury. He didn't want compensation but he still had to go to the toilet to carry feces. Chapter 416. Uncle, Master asked me to tell you that you don't have to wait for her for dinner. Just leave some food for her. When Li Yi was copying Journey to the West and the Legend of the Condor Heroes in his room, Yang Liuqing walked in and said, "Mississippi Lu finally found a new toy not long ago." The Wulian hero list was stirred up by her. It was said that the master who ranked 6th on the heaven list came all the way from Qingzhou to Qingan Prefecture to challenge her. He seemed to think that women were easier to bully. It was very likely that he could defeat her and refresh his ranking. The top 5 on the heaven list. Just thinking about it made him a little excited. If he worked harder he could defeat the 4th, 3rd, 2nd and 1st and jump to the top of the list. Wouldn't that mean that he would be the number 1 master below the master level? There were many people with this idea. In just a few days Mississippi Lu had received many letters of challenge. Mississippi Lu wanted to see the world in chaos. She was worried about not being able to find a real master to spar with. Of course she accepted all the letters of challenge. 2 days later, under everyone's endless anticipation, the 5th and 6th ranked experts on the heavenly list finally had an unparalleled battle. The result was that after 100 moves, the experts spat out 2 ounces of blood and the battle ended. It was said that on that day second young lady Lu wielded her sword, her white clothes fluttering in the wind, and her sharp sword light blinded countless people's eyes. After that the people who had challenged her never showed their faces again. According to Old Sun, the performance of the theater that day was more than 10 times that of the past. These days Mississippi Lu was very busy. She usually didn't eat at home on time. Li Yi was already used to it. Got it. What else did she say? Li Yi continued to work and asked without raising his head. Master also said that she wanted to eat braised prawns and braised purple melon for dinner. Not too sour sweet and sour fish. Steamed rice should be neither too soft nor too hard. Anything else? Li Yi raised his head and squeezed out a few words through gritted teeth. Nothing else. Yang Liuqing hurriedly ran out. His voice came from outside the door. "I'm going out of the city to look for Master. I can't help martial uncle during dinner." Watching Yang Liuqing quickly disappear from his sight, Li Yi sighed. She used to be such a hard-working little girl. Look at how she has been taught by Mississippi Lu. As for Mississippi Lu herself, she didn't stay at home all day. She still wanted to eat braised prawns, braised eggplant and sweet and sour fish. If she came home late she would eat leftovers. The Drunken Fragrance Tower was the most famous restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture. It was a high-class restaurant with exquisite dishes and attentive service. It was the first choice for high officials and nobles to treat their guests. "Lord Li, it's been a long time. I've missed you." In a heaven classroom somewhere, Magistrate Wang looked enthusiastic. His attitude was even more enthusiastic than when Li Yi was the county lieutenant. "Lord Li, please take a seat." Registrar Zheng was even more enthusiastic. He personally walked over and pulled out a chair for Li Yi. "We are colleagues. You don't have to be so polite," Li Yi said with a smile. When he was the county lieutenant, he basically fished for 1 day and dried for 10 days. He didn't have much friendship with Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng. But after a few months, when he saw them again after the trip to the capital, he felt inexplicably closer. Magistrate Wang cupped his hands and said with a face full of smiles, "First of all, I have to congratulate Lord Li on being conferred a noble title. Since His Majesty ascended the throne, it has been extremely rare to be conferred a noble title. Lord Li's strong royal favor really makes me envious." Registrar Zheng also showed envy on his face. Why did they become officials? It was to bring honor to their ancestors and fight for a good inheritance for their descendants. Being promoted to a noble title was what they had been pursuing all their lives. They worked hard for half of their lives, but their lives became more and more miserable. Looking at Lord Li, he was so young. But the more they thought about it, the more they felt that they were complete failures. Li Yi smiled and said, "What's there to be envious about, Lord Wang? Even His Majesty has praised Anxi County many times. Now that County Magistrate Lu has become the magistrate of the capital, the two of you will naturally have bright futures ahead of you." Alas, Lord Li doesn't know. Magistrate Wang sighed and said with great sorrow, "I really miss the days when Lord Lu was still around." Standing behind Magistrate Wang, Dun Yo and another constable glanced at each other, and they both saw the fear in each other's eyes. Then they quietly took 2 steps back. In their minds, they had already made up a lot of 18 forbidden stories about Magistrate Wang and County Magistrate Lu that had to be told. After listening to Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng talk about County Magistrate Wei's behavior after being transferred to Anxi County, Li Yi pretended to be surprised and asked, "Lord Li, your situation has already deteriorated to such a state, but County Magistrate Wei is still so overbearing?" Magistrate Wang sighed and pointed to the top of his head, saying, "County Magistrate Wei was transferred from the capital. He already has a foundation and has the support of the magistrate's government, so he acts unscrupulously. The two of us have been working in Anxi County for many years, but we can't even compare to him for 2 months. Now even the gentry who originally supported us are about to fall to his side." Li Yi was very clear about this. Although the county magistrate was the head of a county, his achievements still depended on the support of the people below him. The gentry of every place were equivalent to the local bullies. Without their cooperation, even the county magistrate would not be able to achieve anything. Most of the county magistrates appointed by the imperial court came from other places. It would take a long time to rope in these people. Similarly, Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng also had their own subordinates. The several parties restricted each other and cooperated with each other. This was the normal state of a county's leadership. Based on the current situation, the balance in Anxi County was obviously going to be broken by County Magistrate Wei. Once he established his dominance and authority, County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng would become empty shells. In the future, not to mention their future, they would definitely have to retire in advance and live a leisurely life. Magistrate Wang suddenly stood up and bowed to Li Yi respectfully together with Registrar Zheng. He said solemnly, "We know that Lord Li must have a way. As colleagues, please help us, Lord Li." As the second in command and third in command of a county, they usually had to be bowed to by others. However, at this moment they didn't care about it at all. Compared to their official career, these superficial things were not important at all. If Li Yi didn't want to help them, he should be cooking braised prawns for Mississippi Lu in the kitchen at home, instead of talking nonsense with them here. It didn't matter who became the county magistrate of Anxi County, but it was a little too much for County Magistrate Wei to target the theater. If he really interfered with the theater, how could he carry out his work in the future? It would be too inconvenient to guide public opinion and create a rebellion. Regarding this matter, no matter what, he had no reason to sit back and do nothing. Chapter 417. You're too polite. Li Yi made a gesture with his hands and said, "Since you've said so, I can't just sit back and do nothing. But this matter can't be explained clearly in a few words. Let's sit down and talk about it slowly." After getting Li Yi's promise, Magistrate Wang and Registrar Zheng's dejection was swept away, and their faces were full of expectation. Even County Magistrate Lu had to respect County Magistrate Li before. Since he was so confident, the possibility of success should be 80 to 90%. "What's your plan?" Magistrate Wang looked at him and asked. Li Yi didn't answer directly. Instead he looked at them and asked, "Before that I want to ask you two first. County Magistrate Wei squeezed you out. Did you really have no preparation at all?" If the two of them really watched them fall to this point without taking any measures, Li Yi felt that it would be better for them to be an empty shell. Magistrate Wang and Secretary Jing looked at each other and hesitated for a moment. Then they looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "You must be joking. If I really didn't have any preparation, I'm afraid I wouldn't have the chance to be the county magistrate more than 10 years ago." As soon as Magistrate Wang finished his words, Secretary Jing smiled and took out a booklet from his arms. He handed it to Li Yi and said, "Have a look at this, Mr. Li." Dun Yo and that constable looked at each other quickly. Having worked in the county government for so many years, how could they not have any political sense? They knew that what these officials were going to say should be something big, so they hurriedly said, "Mr. Li, we'd better stand outside and watch." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's not a big deal. You can listen to it if you want." Magistrate Wang's face showed a trace of thinking. The next moment he said, "Listen to Mr. Li. You can stay here." Secretary Jing nodded slightly and understood the implication of Magistrate Wang's words. From now on, Dainiu and Wei Chong would be their trusted subordinates. Magistrate Wang no longer looked at Dainiu and the others. He turned his head and looked at Li Yi with a trace of worry on his face. "To tell you the truth, although County Magistrate Wei has done things perfectly, we still have some information that we can use against him. However, these are far from enough." County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Jing certainly wouldn't sit still and wait for death when County Magistrate Wei forced them like this. However, the problem was that the things they collected were far from enough to bring down County Magistrate Wei. In the officialdom, if they couldn't kill County Magistrate Wei with one blow, what awaited them would be more terrible things. These things are indeed not enough, but what if you add this? Li Yi took out a plate from his pocket and threw it to Magistrate Wang. Magistrate Wang hurriedly took the plate. After looking at it for a while, he asked in confusion, "Lord Li, what is this?" Looking at the puzzled expressions on their faces, Li Yi had the urge to turn around and leave. What? That Li Yi actually didn't come? In another room of the Drunken Fragrance Tower, a noble young master said with a slightly angry expression. The young man, who looked a little embarrassed with a scratch on his forehead, gritted his teeth and said, "Young master, that Li Yi obviously didn't take you seriously. Are we just going to let this go?" "Is the Li Yi that young Master Wei mentioned the first talent of Qing in prefecture?" A young man in the room suddenly asked. "What? Is there a problem with that Li Yi?" The noble raised his eyebrows and said. The young man hesitated for a while and said, "Not really, but his background is indeed not that simple. If young Master Wei wants to touch him, you better be more careful." This young Master Wei had just arrived and hadn't heard the rumors about that person. Although he didn't know that much about that Li Yi, it was best to say what he knew to avoid unnecessary trouble. "Although my father doesn't allow me to cause any trouble during this period of time, you have hurt my people. If I just let this matter go, would I still have any face left?" Although he had already raised some vigilance in his heart, the noble young master was still unyielding with his words. The young man at the side suddenly thought of something and said, "Young master, sir seems to be at Drunken Fragrance Tower tonight. So what if my father is here?" The noble slammed the table and said, "I don't want to do anything. Can't I just have a meal here?" Although he acted very domineering, the young man knew that his young master was scared. He had caused trouble a few times in a row and almost had Sir Wei punish him. During this time he was much more peaceful than before. "Sir Wei, let us toast to you." In the first room of Drunken Fragrance Tower, a dozen people all stood up and raised the wine cups in their hands. They bowed and toasted County Magistrate Wei, who was sitting in the middle. County Magistrate Wei calmly raised his cup and took a sip, while the others could only drink up the wine in their cups. "In the future we have to rely on Sir Wei more." Everyone knew the purpose of tonight's banquet. After talking for a while, they had to express their attitude straightforwardly. Before this, they had done enough research on County Magistrate Wei. They knew that he had an extraordinary background and acted in an overbearing manner. In the county government, County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Jing were both suppressed by him and could not turn over a new leaf. The balance in the hearts of those who were close to County Magistrate Wei gradually tilted. They chose an official just for the better continuation of their families. Since Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng had lost their power, they naturally had to choose a new big tree to rely on. Although County Magistrate Wei didn't show any expression on his face, he was very satisfied in his heart. After glancing around, he suddenly frowned and asked Advisor Chen, "What about the people in the theater?" Advisor Chen's face was also a little bad as he said, "Sir, that old man's son really doesn't know how to appreciate favors." County Magistrate Wei didn't speak anymore, but his eyes narrowed. Since ancient times, officials in the capital were 3 ranks higher than those in the capital. Although his rank didn't change after he was transferred to Qing'an Prefecture, he didn't think much of places other than the capital, even though this was Qing'an Prefecture, a place that even the king of Shu valued very much. With the help of his superiors, he had been doing things smoothly these days. When he encountered some small obstacles, he felt that it was a little interesting. County Magistrate Wei showed a trace of a smile on his face, which made the people around him feel cold. At this moment, the door of the room was pushed open. County Magistrate Wei, who was thinking about something, didn't notice it, but the others saw it immediately. When they saw Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng, some people looked a little embarrassed because just a few days ago they were on the side of these two people. More people were confused and shocked. They didn't know why these two people who shouldn't be here would appear here. Magistrate Wang glanced at the crowd and said expressionlessly, "You guys go out first." Even if Magistrate Wang was suppressed by County Magistrate Wei, they couldn't disobey him. When immortals fought, it was better for ordinary people like them to stay far away. County Magistrate Wei finally collected his thoughts. Seeing that everyone had left the door, he did not stop them. Instead, he looked up at County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng and said with a smile, "Oh, I wonder what brings you here?" Although Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng were half a rank lower than the county magistrate, as the second in command and third in command of a county, County Magistrate Wei's attitude was extremely arrogant. Dainiu and Wei Chong had already closed the door, leaving only County Magistrate Wei and Advisor Chen. Magistrate Wang wasn't angry about County Magistrate Wei's attitude. He threw a booklet in his hand on the table and said lightly, "Sir Wei, you've committed a crime." Chapter 418. County Magistrate Wei casually picked up the booklet, flipped it a few times and actually nodded in agreement. He looked at the two and said, "It's beyond my expectation that you could do this. I really underestimated you." He never thought that the two men who had been in the position of county magistrate and secretary for so many years were idiots, but he didn't guard against them. Because County Magistrate Wei knew that most of what he did was not for himself. Even if he had some selfish motives, it was harmless. Even if these things were really put on the table, he wouldn't be afraid. However, he was a little curious about what the two men were thinking. Was this what County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng relied on? Did they really want to turn the tables with these things? County Magistrate Wei threw the booklet on the ground and said, "If this is all, I'm afraid I'll let you down." When County Magistrate Wei said these words, his tone was a little cold. County Magistrate Wang and Secretary Zheng chose the most inappropriate time and the most inappropriate place to offend him. Although it made him a little unhappy, he didn't have to worry about what he was going to do next. "We are colleagues. Why do you have to force us?" County Magistrate Wang sighed and bent down to pick up the booklet on the ground. County Magistrate Wei said lightly, "Things in officialdom are always involuntary. You've been an official for so many years. Don't you know this truth?" Clap. A crisp sound suddenly sounded in the room, like the sound of a piece of wood falling to the ground. County Magistrate Wang picked up a small wooden plate that fell out of his arms and said, "As a county magistrate, County Magistrate Wei should set an example. It's wrong to throw things at random. Even if it can't hit people, it's not good to hit flowers and plants. If it's seen by outsiders, it will damage your reputation." County Magistrate Wang didn't put the wooden plate back into his arms again. He deliberately waved it in front of County Magistrate Wei and said, "Is what I said right or not? What do you think?" County Magistrate Wang's words were not timely. If there was no wooden plate, County Magistrate Wei would definitely think that there was something wrong with his brain and that he was talking nonsense. But he saw it after all, and he saw it very clearly. When he saw that extremely ordinary wooden plate, County Magistrate Wei's indifferent face disappeared, and his pupils suddenly shrank. "Sir, the dishes in the kitchen are not for sale. If you want to eat something, just tell us and we will immediately prepare and send it to you. This won't do. The cook of Fragrant House looked helpless. The young man in front of him was simply the weirdest guest he had ever met. If he wanted to eat something, he could tell the waiter and they would naturally prepare and send it to him as soon as possible. But he didn't order any dishes. Instead, he insisted to buy some fish and prawns and Kunlun purple melons. Didn't up. The waiter behind the young man winked at the cook and said, "What are you talking about? This guest is a distinguished guest. Isn't it just a few dishes? Hurry up and prepare." If other guests had made such a request, they would have chased them out as troublemakers. However, the guests in the heavenly room were not ordinary. It was not worthwhile to offend them for such a small matter. The fish must be fresh, the prawns must be no less than 1 inch, and the Kunlun purple melons were the first batch of this year. It was not worthwhile to offend them for such a small matter. The fish had to be fresh and the shrimp couldn't be smaller than 1 inch. As for the Kunlun purple melon, that was the first crop of the year. Even the restaurant couldn't meet the demand. This young master really knew how to pick. The fish must be fresh, the prawns must not be less than 1 inch, and the Kunlun purple melons, that was actually the first batch of this year. The supply could not meet the demand. This young man really knew how to choose. County Magistrate Wei came from the capital, so he shouldn't be as ignorant as those two. The Secret Intelligence Department was actually a sharp blade hanging over the heads of all the officials, from the 7th-rank county magistrate to the 1st-rank officials. No one was not afraid of these people who dissociated from the law and represented the will of the emperor. On the way from the capital to Qing and Prefecture, he had used this wooden plate several times and made some additional discoveries. Apart from the capital, the power of the Secret Intelligence Division was everywhere. The officials never knew their counselors, housekeepers, or even coachmen at home. Besides being counselors, housekeepers, and coachmen, they didn't know what other identities they had. A wooden plate inadvertently revealed could change the position of the master and servant instantly. The emperor couldn't be a harmless uncle next door. Li Yi even suspected that there was someone who meticulously recorded how many times the officials had sex with their wives at night. Whether there was such a person in the Viscount's mansion, Li Yi didn't know, but it wouldn't affect him much. The maids who could enter the inner courtyard all grew up in the Li mansion. When he was sunbathing in the yard, no one could hear him except the wind. When he was about to go upstairs, a few figures came down from upstairs. The young man in the lead had a young woman in his arms. Surrounded by several people, they took up most of the space on the stairs. When Li Yi walked up sideways, he suddenly saw the woman turn her head and ask in surprise, "Are you Li Yi Li?" Li Yi turned his head and saw the surprised expression on the woman's face. He looked at her carefully and realized that he didn't know her. The young man with the woman in his arms was stunned for a moment. He looked at Li Yi and said with a slightly angry expression, "You are Li Yi? What a big show. You made me wait for so long." The young man behind the young man was stunned. It seemed that he hadn't had time to say this today before he was beaten out. But why was Li Yi here? Had he already said it, but he was beaten so badly by the woman that he forgot? Li Yi glanced at the young man's face. He still didn't know this man. What did he mean just now? "Let me tell you, Goddess Luo Shui is mine. You'd better stay away from Lady Zuemo in the future, otherwise." The young man let go of the woman, looked at Li Yi and threatened. "Psycho." Li Yi turned his head and left. He had seen too many people like this in the past few days. Before the young man finished his words, he had to stop. A trace of anger appeared on his face. He strode upstairs and reached out to grab Li Yi's collar. In the innermost part of the 2nd floor, outside the Tianzi room number 1, many people were waiting anxiously, but there was no sound from the room. County Magistrate Wei and County Magistrate Wang, Secretary Zheng, had already fallen out. What else could be discussed for so long? Of course, no one knew that in the room, a layer of sweat had appeared on County Magistrate Wei's forehead. The Secret Intelligence Office, it was actually the Secret Intelligence Office. How could County Magistrate Wang be His Majesty's man? County Magistrate Wei used to be an official in the capital, so he was naturally knowledgeable. How could he not know the department that made countless officials tremble just by hearing its name? If the censors were hawks that supervised the officials in the open, then the Secret Intelligence Office was a poisonous snake hiding in the dark. No one knew when they would jump out and bite people. But there was no doubt that the officials who were lucky enough to see the people of the Secret Intelligence Office would never see anything else. The moment he saw the plate, County Magistrate Wei finally realized that he was not dealing with County Magistrate Wang, nor the Secret Intelligence Office, but it was the existence that made him break out in a cold sweat at the thought of it. It was an existence that no matter who was behind him or what background he had, he could not disobey. At this time it was no longer important whether he had done anything or not. Had those people ever cared about those things? Even if the Anxi County Magistrate hung himself on the beam of his house tomorrow morning, he would not be able to cause much trouble. Yes, Lord Wang is right. County Magistrate Wei forcibly suppressed the fear in his heart, stood up from his seat and bowed, saying, "Lords, please sit down." The people outside the door had been waiting for a long time, and finally heard a sound coming from behind them. The door was opened from the inside, and then everyone saw a scene that made them extremely shocked and confused. "Thank you, Lord Wei." County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Jing walked out with smiles on their faces. The one who spoke was County Magistrate Wang. "Ah, you're too polite. As the Anxi County Magistrate, this is my duty." County Magistrate Wei walked side by side with them. His face was ruddy and he also had a bright smile on his face. The scene of everyone being good to each other, and the world being peaceful and stable immediately made everyone's eyes pop out. When County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Jing entered just now, weren't there still sparks flying in all directions? Why were they suddenly beaming with joy and loving? What did the three of them do in such a short period of time? How could there be such a huge change? Chapter 419. Why are you still here? County Magistrate Wei looked at the people at the door and asked with a frown. Hearing County Magistrate Wei's words, these representatives of the gentry cursed in their hearts. If you didn't invite us here, who would be willing to come here and pretend to be a coward? Of course they couldn't show these thoughts. They were eager to get involved in the affairs of County Magistrate Wei and County Magistrate Wang, so they immediately cupped their hands and left. "Ah, it hurts, let go." The young noble's body was twisted into a strange angle and his wrist was pinched by another young man. He walked from the front, howling miserably. Dad, save me." Seeing County Magistrate Wei standing at the door of a room, the young noble's howl became louder. Seeing his son being restrained, County Magistrate Wei's face changed. When he was about to speak, County Magistrate Wang pulled his sleeve and secretly made a gesture. County Magistrate Wei's body shook and his face was a little pale. He hurriedly walked over and said, "Is it Lord Li? My son has offended you. I didn't discipline him well. I apologize to Lord Li on his behalf." Li Yi let go of the young man's wrist, cupped his hands and said to County Magistrate Wei, "Lord Wei, it's an honor to meet you." County Magistrate Wei gave a hollow laugh. When he turned to look at the young noble, his face suddenly darkened and he said angrily, "Unfilial son, apologize to Lord Li." The young noble was still a little confused at this time. Just now he wanted to pat Li Yi's shoulder, but his wrist was grabbed by him. It was very painful to struggle a little and he was dragged here awkwardly. Now his father's enigmatic respectful attitude was like a blow to his head. He trembled and said, Lord Li, I'm sorry." Another pursuer of Zheng Zimo. Li Yi had been used to it these days. Then he looked at County Magistrate Wang who was beaming with joy. It seemed that he and Registrar Jing should have settled the matter. In this way, Li Yi had nothing to say to them and County Magistrate Wei. He put away the card. The waiter had already brought what he wanted and threw him a piece of silver. Under the surprised and puzzled eyes of several people, he slowly walked out of Drunken Fragrance restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back. This Lord Li is really... County Magistrate Wei thought for a long time as he watched him leave with a paper bag in one hand and a live fish in the other, but he couldn't think of a word to describe him. He had never thought that such a person was actually a superior of the Secret Intelligence Office. Fortunately, the other party didn't seem to want to kill him. County Magistrate Wei let out a sigh of relief in his heart. At this point, the development of the matter had completely gone out of his control. It was not good to be caught between two big shots, so it was better to let this matter rot in his heart forever. When he turned his head to look at County Magistrate Wang and Registrar Jing, the smile on his face brightened again. It was late at night and Mississippi Lu was sitting in the courtyard. On the stone table, there were a few dishes that she had casually mentioned before she left in the morning. At that time she really just said it casually. In fact, after leaving home, even she herself had forgotten about it. However, these dishes were now placed on the stone table, still slightly steaming. She glanced at the candlelight in the room and picked up the chopsticks. Husband, rest early. It won't be too late to continue writing tomorrow morning. Li Yi was writing at a rapid speed by the table. Rui walked over from the bedside and gently massaged his shoulders. There's no hurry. If you're tired, go to sleep first. I have other things to do tomorrow morning. Rui didn't answer, but she didn't move her body either. She just stood behind him, and the strength of her hands gradually became gentler. She lowered her head and quietly looked at what he was writing on the paper. It was rare to see someone as lazy as him doing something so seriously. These days she could clearly feel that he was a little different from before. Although she didn't understand what he was doing, nor did she know how she could help him, at least for now, she could do something for him. Bang! The oil lamp exploded and Li Yi just happened to end a new chapter. He stretched his arms and was slightly stunned by the softness in his palms. When he turned his head, he saw Rui standing there blinking at him. "Ah, wife, why aren't you asleep yet?" he asked in surprise. "What time is it now?" "It's just past midnight." Rui looked at him and asked, "Husband, do you still want to continue writing?" No. Li Yi waved his hand and carried her by the waist. He walked to the bedside and said, "It's getting late. It's time to sleep." She only struggled symbolically for a few moments before completely giving up. Even the side of her neck was covered with a layer of pink. Omitted here. Time passed quietly. Only when they thought back would they feel that time had passed quickly. They couldn't even remember what had happened in the past few days. But for the women in the capital, this wasn't the case. They could clearly remember the specific day of a certain month, and what kind of perfume the perfume shop had released. Every season there would be a different perfume. The originally dull days suddenly became incomparably exciting. It's been another month. Does that guy not intend to come back? Li Xian's complexion looked somewhat haggard. He rubbed the space between his brows and pushed away the pile of blueprints on the table. He carefully supported the crown princess who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. He carried her horizontally on the brocade couch, tucked the corners of the blanket and sat back at the table. The perfume business had been going smoothly. Even he himself didn't know how much money the crown prince's residence had. Other things made him somewhat vexed. The recent research had all reached a bottleneck and there had been no progress for many days. Uncle Huang had fallen ill half a month ago, and his health had been deteriorating. He hadn't attended court for half a month. If not for the left and right prime ministers handling the political affairs, the entire court would have long been in chaos. Under this chaos, there were more and more calls for the appointment of a successor. The king of Shu could be said to be riding on the crest of success these days. He had close contact with countless high-ranking officials in the court. He would probably wake up laughing even in his dreams. Uncle Huang's illness was one thing, but so was the king of Shu. Other than the crown prince's residence, he actually didn't have much of a good impression of the entire capital. In the past, when he encountered difficulties, there were still people who could help him. But now, that person who could help him was having a good time in Qingyan Prefecture. If it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't let go of the matters in the capital, how could he not want to live such a happy life? Looking at the sky, a trace of tiredness appeared on Li Xian's face. It was getting late. He should rest early. He still had to go to the palace early in the morning. Thinking of this, he walked to the bedside, lay down beside the crown princess and slept in his clothes. Sir won't come back," Prince Jean said proudly as he pinched Yongning's little face, leaving a red mark on her delicate little face. The little girl looked up at him. There was no change in her expression, as if she wasn't the one being bullied. A few palace maids and eunuchs stood in the distance, looking at Princess Yongning with a sorrowful expression. However, Prince Jin's guards were staring at them, so they didn't dare to act rashly. A young figure appeared in the distance. After seeing this scene, Li Xian walked over with a frown and said, "Li Han, you bullied Yongning again." When he saw Li Xian walking over, Li Han stuck out his tongue and disappeared like a wisp of smoke. Although Li Xian wasn't his biological brother, Li Han had heard that he could make people fly like a kite. Xianxia had seen it with her own eyes. Li Han was worried that he would also be used as a kite. Because he was afraid of heights, he usually avoided this cousin of his. Li Xian looked coldly at Prince Jin's guards and said, "You guys, if you help Prince Jin to bully Princess Yongning again, don't blame me for breaking your legs." The guards repeatedly nodded in agreement. His Highness Prince Jin was still a child, but Prince Li Xian wasn't. If he dared to break their legs, he would really do it. In the future they had to stay far away from him. However, Prince Jin's actions weren't something that the people around Princess Yongning dared to stop. Li Xian only saw it. They were all children. Besides, he also did the same thing at that time. It was just that the other princes were beaten and the one who beat them was Zhou. He looked at Princess Yongning, who was in a daze, and walked straight to a palace. Before he entered the palace, he saw two figures coming out of the hall. Li Xian greets Prime Minister Shen and Prime Minister Qin. The two people who came out of the hall were the two prime ministers of the current dynasty. They were both veterans of several dynasties. Not to mention Li Xian, even the princes had to greet them as juniors. The two old men also nodded slightly to him. The old man, who was called Prime Minister Shen by Li Xian, looked at him deeply when he passed by, but Li Xian, who was worried, didn't notice it. A eunuch had already gone in to report. He stood outside the hall for a long time before the eunuch came out and asked him to come in. Emperor Jing was lying on the brocade couch. His face was slightly pale and there was a thick twilight on his face. When he saw Li Xian coming in, he squeezed a smile on his face and said, "Xianer is here. Come to Uncle Huang." "Uncle Huang, are you feeling better?" Li Xian walked over quickly and looked at the man who had been indomitable in his heart since he was young. He couldn't help but choke with sobs when he saw him so weak. Emperor Jing patted the back of his hand and said with a smile, "Ah, don't worry. Uncle Huang still has some days to live. I won't go after the late emperor so soon. Uncle Huang carries the fate of the entire Jing kingdom. With the blessing of the heavens, you will definitely be safe." Li Xian's palm tightened slightly as he said in a low voice. When he was a child, he stayed in the palace for a few years. Whether it was the emperor or the empress, they all took care of him. Other than his parents, he also had deep feelings for them. Emperor Jing didn't continue the topic just now. He looked at him and said, "You don't look very well. Is there anything bothering you these days?" "Nothing. Maybe I've been too tired recently." Li Xian shook his head and said. Emperor Jing was silent for a while and said, "Originally, you should be living a carefree and happy life in Qing'anfu. It was I who made you stay in Jingdo and do these things that you didn't want to do. Do you resent me because of this?" Li Xian was startled. He immediately shook his head and said, "Uncle Huang naturally has his reasons for doing this. I have never thought of it this way." Emperor Jing's face showed a gratified expression. He said, "Because of what happened to me, the Empress has not had a good time these days. Other than Zhou, among these children you are the closest to her. If there is nothing important, go spend more time with her." "Little Xian understands," Li Xian said with a nod. "Your Majesty, it's time to take your medicine." A ghostly figure suddenly appeared in the hall, and then Changda's hoarse voice was heard. Not long after, Li Xian walked out of the hall. He stood at the door and let out a long sigh. The omnipotent giant in his impression seemed to have really fallen. He hoped that the pills made by the Daoist priests would be useful. He heard that after taking their pills one could live forever. There should be no problem in treating Uncle Huang's illness. Thinking of what the emperor had just said, he walked out of the palace and turned in a direction. That was the empress's palace. With the two prime ministers and countless courtiers, even the emperor was gone in a short time. Even Jingdo was operating steadily and orderly, let alone Qing'anfu. In the past month, Old Sun had been even busier. Not only did he have to deal with the matters of the theater, but he also had to prepare for the trip to Jingdo. Although he had gone to Jingdo, the theater in Qing'anfu had to continue operating. Before he left, he had to choose suitable people to take over here. Although he had consciously trained some talents, they were still a long way from being able to take charge. Fortunately, other than that, he didn't have to worry about other miscellaneous matters. Advisor Chen's attitude toward him couldn't be better. As long as it was related to the theater, he would give him the green light. The theater had already integrated more than 80% of the wandering performers in Qing'an Prefecture, and the team was constantly expanding. Every day, Old Man Sun felt that he was one step closer to his dream. Just a while ago, the legend of the Condor heroes had officially ended. Another story called The Return of the Condor Heroes had seamlessly connected with it. Not only had its popularity not decreased, but it had also ushered in a new wave of popularity. And Journey to the West, which was still continuing, had always maintained a high level of popularity. When it was being told, it was almost always full. It was hard to imagine what effect it would have if it was adapted into a play. This made his admiration for young Surly reach its peak. High-quality content was always the foundation of survival for actors. As long as he was there, they didn't have to worry about this problem. Every time he thought of the fact that Jingdo was still an undeveloped wasteland in this area, Old Sun wished he could grow wings and fly there. The noon of May was already very hot. Li Yi estimated that the temperature outside was at least 35 degrees. He had already moved the rocking chair back and held a large block of ice in his arms. He also placed ice basins in the four corners of the room. Only then did he feel much more comfortable. Xiaohuan's teeth were very good. She sat beside him, pieces of crushed ice were thrown into her mouth and crunched noisily. Who would have ice to eat in the middle of summer? Ever since she could remember, this was the most comfortable summer she had. This kind of life was also what Li Yi liked. If it wasn't for a series of letters from Jingdo, the last of which brought news of the old madam's illness, Li Yi wouldn't have even thought of going back. Chapter 420. Son-in-law, are we going back to the capital? Xiaohuan put a piece of crushed ice into Li Yi's mouth and blinked as she asked. Li Yi had added sugar to the ice. It was sweet. Although it couldn't compare to the ice cream he had eaten before, under the current conditions, it was the only necessary item to relieve the heat. Let's wait a few more days when the weather is cooler. Li Yi also understood that he couldn't hide in Qing'anfu forever. They had already been away from the capital for more than 3 months. The old mistress was clearly very anxious. Now that many matters in Qing'anfu had been sorted out, it was time to return. The busiest person in the family was Mississippi Lu. Other than coming back on time for meals, he couldn't see her at any other time. In the afternoon after eating, the heat gradually dissipated. It was also the busiest time of the day in the prefectural city. Li Yi, Rui and Xiaohuan walked on the street. The small ice can in Xiaohuan's hands was confiscated by him. In order to prevent her from getting a stomachache, the little servant girl looked at him with a pitiful expression all the way. Li Yi turned a blind eye to her strategy of acting cute until the ice inside melted into water. Under the resentful gaze of the little servant girl, he gulped it down. When they reached the front of a shop, Xiaohuan and Rui stood in the shade and waited. Li Yi went to buy them mung bean smoothies. On the lower right corner of the shop signboard, there was a small willow leaf imprint. This meant that this shop was now under Li Yi's name. The method of making ice in the summer was, of course, provided by Li Yi. The theater was no longer just a place for storytelling and acting. The business under his name had also begun to involve other fields. Other than those wealthy families who could afford to build ice houses, ordinary people would not be able to see ice in the heat of the summer. Therefore, although it was no longer the hottest place of the day, there was still a long line in front of the shop. Of course, Li Yi did not need to line up. He entered through a small door on the side. The people in line only looked at him enviously and did not criticize him. They didn't have a tael of silver to spare to apply for a VIP card, so they naturally couldn't use the VIP channel. The shop assistant obviously knew this young boss. After respectfully leading him to the rest area at the side, he immediately turned around to prepare. There were several lines in front of the long counter, but only one of them went all the way to the door. Behind the counter was a young girl about 15 or 16 years old. She had a sweet smile and 2 dimples appeared at the corners of her mouth. Even the people in other lines could not help but stare at her. It's said that this shop's Xiaonyang looks pure and lovely. Now that I've seen her today, she really lives up to her reputation. To tell you the truth, there are 3 shops selling green bean smoothie in Qing'an Prefecture. I came to the furthest one to see this lady. This brother and I are kindred spirits. Who didn't want to taste a cooling cup of green bean smoothie on a hot summer day? However, ice cubes were priceless. Those rich families didn't even have enough for themselves and kept it to themselves. Why would they take it out to sell? In this scorching hot weather, spending 10 copper coins to experience the refreshing and stimulating feeling of ice cubes was something that no one could resist. Therefore, the day this shop opened for business, People almost broke the doorway. Because of its low price and good service, even though 2 more shops were opened, the supply was still not enough to meet the demand in the prefectural city. Thus, the name Green Bean Smoothie quickly spread throughout the prefectural city. At the same time, the name of this sweet, smiling, pure and lovely smoothie sister also became famous. In the beginning, there were only a few people talking about a certain Xianxia selling green bean smoothie on a certain street in the prefectural city. She was beautiful and very pleasing to the eye, greatly improving their shopping experience. Later, for some reason, these voices gradually increased. The rumors said that Xianxia was as beautiful as a fairy, rare in this world and difficult to find in the heavens. Countless people came here not to buy things, but to admire the beauty of a fairy. The facts naturally caused them to be slightly disappointed. How could there be a heavenly immortal? Even though that little lady was beautiful, she couldn't compare to the likes of Lu Qiao and Feng Miao Miao. But they had to admit that her smile was sweet. Even though it was slightly less charming than the 2 of them, it was more pure, and it caused others to be unable to help but arouse a feeling of tenderness with a single glance. The price was good, and the beauty was pleasing to the eye. As a result, the shop's business naturally became better and there were often long lines at the door. In front of the beauty, although everyone was also whispering, their behavior was quite well behaved. When they took the green bean smoothie, they did not do anything out of line. It was not that they did not want to, but the 2 men who were wiping the tables in the corner were too fierce. A few days ago, there was a ruffian who wanted to take advantage of the girl. He had only touched her small hand, but he was almost beaten half to death by the 2 men. He was tied to the pillar at the door and left to bask in the sun for the whole afternoon. It was a tragic scene. Li Yi took 3 cups of smoothie and went out. Listening to the contents of the discussion, he had to admit that she was indeed worthy of being the goddess of Luo Shui, the former top artist of the Jade Courtyard. In terms of the ability to support people, even if Li Yi did the planning himself, he might not be better than Xing Zimo. After all, the era was different. Many of the methods he knew were not applicable here. After eating the smoothie, he returned the cup. Nowadays, not only did people buy green bean smoothie, but they also bought the exquisite cups that Li Yi had personally designed and could only be found in smoothie shops. Then he walked out of the city. Not far from the city gate, he could see a huge open space surrounded by wooden stakes. There were fences built in the open space as well as a high platform 5 feet above the ground. From afar, he could see people moving around on the high platform, and the cheers from below were endless. There was almost no need for constables in Qing and prefectural city now. On the streets, brave heroes could be seen at any time. Even the most common bullying rarely happened, let alone murder. As for the surrounding bandits, they had almost disappeared without a trace. They did not even dare to show their heads, afraid that if they were not careful, they would give up their heads and be used by the heroes to make a name for themselves. That great hero, who was ranked in the top 10 of the heaven ranking, was ranked first on the chivalry ranking even though he was not at the top of the expert ranking board. He had already used the heads of more than 10 imperial court criminals to clear the ranking board, and he had leaped to the top of the chivalry ranking board in one go. He was respected by countless people, and this was what it meant to be a man of both virtue and skill. On the other hand, those who were ranked high in martial arts but did not do any chivalry deeds were far less famous than him. People had gradually acknowledged that martial arts did not make one a chivalrous hero. Martial ethics were the standard to judge a chivalrous hero. Just like Hero Guijing, a chivalrous hero who served the country and the people, he was truly the model of a new era's chivalrous hero, a role model that everyone respected. As for those famous martial arts figures that people were familiar with, they were martial arts figures hiding deep in the mountains or in their own homes. If they had the ability, come out and make a name for themselves on the chivalry ranking. Those who were not on the chivalry ranking were all *T heroes. When it came to these martial arts figures, Li Yi found it strange at first. Did they not have to do anything? Why did they wander around Qing and prefectural city all day? Later he found out that most of them were wandering heroes who were obsessed with martial arts. How could they have the chance to see so many experts compete? They would not miss it no matter what. When the 3 of them walked onto the high platform, the winner was decided. A man flew down from the platform in a sorry state. Chapter 421. The man who flew down from the ring did not manage to complete the backward wild goose falling style. When he was being beaten by the woman in the ring, a man who was already prepared below the ring jumped up and caught him. He landed heavily on the ground. Everyone was already used to this scene. The competition in the arena was not a fight to the death, and the participants were not allowed to kill their opponents. In fact, the organizers of the brothel had even thoughtfully thought of letting some martial artists wait below the stage to prevent the participants from falling off the stage and getting injured. The man who rushed out just now was such a person. Even heroes had to live and eat. Some people simply took on the job of a brothel. It was something convenient, but they could watch many experts fight for free. It was really a great advantage. Thank you, brother. After the man landed steadily, he shook his head and looked regretful. The next moment he turned his head and apologized to the man. The man just smiled honestly. He thought that it was not easy to catch that blow just now. It was probably worth 10 copper coins, at least 8. If the price was lower than that, he would not compromise. I didn't expect that there would be another newcomer on the heaven list. Heroes really come from the young. This girl was just ranked in the middle of the earth list a month ago. I didn't expect that she would step into the heaven list a month later. I have seen many of her competitions. She has made great progress in almost every one of them. Are there really so many geniuses in the martial arts world now? You only know one thing but not the other. That girl has made great progress, so she is naturally talented. But do you know who her master is? Although there were ordinary people watching this kind of competition, there were not many. Most of the onlookers were martial artists. They also unconsciously took on the role of commentators for others. Oh, who is her master? Everyone's interest was piqued by the tall and thin man, so they asked one after another. The tall and thin man pointed to the place where the girl jumped off the ring and said, "See for yourself." Hearing this, everyone looked sideways. What? Her master is the graceful sword heroine Lu. With just a glance, the crowd recognized the famous figure in the recent arena battles. She was Lu Rui, heroine Lu, who was known as the graceful sword. The reason why she was called the graceful sword was because not only was her martial arts extremely high, the sword techniques she used were exquisite beyond compare. Could even be said to be unimaginable. As long as she competed, the arena would be filled with a sea of people. It was said that many people had achieved breakthroughs after watching her fight. Now, not only did she have the strength to be ranked on the heaven list, she also had the looks. It was no wonder that the young lady improved so quickly. With such a great teacher guiding her, it would be hard for her not to become an expert. Master, I finally entered the heaven leaderboard. Yang Liuqing jumped off the stage, his face filled with unconcealable excitement. In a month's time she had climbed from the middle of the earth roll to the heaven roll. Although she was only at the bottom, who else but herself knew how much she had suffered these days. Congratulations, Miss Qing. Big sister Qing is so awesome, why don't you take me as your disciple? Entering the heaven leaderboard means that you are a true expert in the martial arts world. It's just that the people at the bottom of the heaven leaderboard love to challenge the most. Miss Qing, you should be more careful. Mississippi Lu only nodded. Although the earth roll and the heaven leaderboard were like heaven and earth, with Yang Liuqing's level of hard work, if he had not achieved such a breakthrough she would have found it strange. On the other hand, the surrounding women happily congratulated him. Currently, Qing and Prefecture had become the largest gathering place for people of the martial arts world. As a fellow woman, heroine Lu, who had outstanding martial arts at such a young age, naturally became the object of their worship. There were many heroines who surrounded her on a daily basis. Martial arts are not for show, nor are they for show. If you had fought with your life on the line just now, you wouldn't have the chance to stand here now. A calm voice traveled over. Although the voice was soft, it resounded in the women's ears. The women all turned their heads and saw a middle-aged Daoist nun wearing a loose Daoist robe standing not far from them. She held a horsetail whisk in her hand. Although the Daoist nun did not turn her head to look at them, they were extremely sure that the words just now were spoken by her. What right do you have to say that? Sister Qing obviously won. The sisters who won the fight were belittled by others. Naturally, they were unhappy and immediately defended themselves. The middle-aged Daoist nun did not speak again. Her expression was indifferent, as if the one who spoke just now was not her. Mississippi Lu looked at the middle-aged Daoist nun thoughtfully. The Daoist nun was right. Of course, she knew that Yang Liuking's weakness was that he had too little experience. However, this was something that she could not teach her because she herself was extremely lacking in this area. The reason why she frequently looked for people to spar with was because she wanted to make up for her shortcomings in this area and step into that legendary realm as soon as possible. Aside from her sister, no one had ever mentioned this matter to her. Now that it was the first time an outsider had mentioned it, she immediately became wary of that Daoist nun. "Uncle Master, you're here." Seeing the figures walking over, Yang Liuking immediately walked over and said, "I saw it from below just now. You're so amazing." Xiao Huan's big eyes were filled with an expression of envy. During this period of time, she and Yang Liuking had already become familiar with each other. Seeing that she defeated her opponent on the stage, she was also happy for her. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu, and then looked at the many women behind her. He could not help but sigh that the idol effect in the martial arts world seemed to be even more terrifying. Even Mississippi Lu had followers, and they were all women. These days, there were actually quite a number of women wandering in the martial arts world. Nowadays, the theater had even recruited many martial arts people with clean backgrounds to be in charge of matters such as the ranking competition. The defensive power had also increased gradually. For example, the man who rushed out to catch the defeated person and his big brother, who had mostly recovered from his injuries, were now considered employees of the theater. Old Sun had the wish to liberate all actors and actresses. Li Yi felt that Mississippi Lu also had a great passion for participating in the martial arts world. In addition to dreaming of becoming the king of mountain bandits, she also wanted to fight in the martial arts world with a sword when she was a child. He was a little worried. What if she took a group of fans to occupy the mountain? Her current appeal was already like this. What would happen in the future? Li Yi was considering whether to hold a hero conference when the time was right. He wanted to create a martial arts leader in the dark for fun. With one order, all heroes would obey. When he saw such a plot in the martial arts TV series when he was a child, his blood boiled with excitement. There was no hope for him in this life. Rui probably would not be interested. It was not bad to use Mississippi Lu's tiger skin to intimidate others. There was not a long gap between the two matches. According to the specific time, there would be a longer gap every 4 matches. This time the person on the stage seemed to be very powerful. The cheers in the arena were much louder than before. When Li Yi looked at a man in green on the stage, Yang Liuking explained in a low voice, "This person is currently ranked 11th on the heaven leaderboard. If someone can challenge and defeat her, they can replace her." 11th on the heaven leaderboard was already very powerful. If there was a master leaderboard, Li Yi estimated that he would not even be in the top 100. This time, although the cheers were loud, no one dared to go up to the stage foolishly. At that level of ranking, no one was ordinary. If they did not have some skills, who would be willing to go up and get beaten up? At that moment, Li Yi saw the middle-aged Daoist nun slowly walk up to the stage. He thought to himself, even if it is afternoon, isn't it hot to wear such a tight Daoist robe? Seeing that it was an unknown Taoist nun who went up, the crowd was clearly disappointed. Although this level of competition was fast, it was not exciting enough. Sure enough, in just a few breaths' time, a figure was sent flying out and landed heavily on the ground, coughing up large mouthfuls of blood. The man waiting at the side of the stage was dumbfounded. Just what happened? Immediately, 2 people ran over and carried the man on a stretcher to the brothel where the resident doctor was. After a short silence, the crowd burst into an uproar. The middle-aged Daoist nun waved her sleeves. There was a look of disappointment on her face as she slowly walked down the stage, just like how she had walked up. Although her footsteps were light, it was as if she was stepping on the hearts of the crowd. The uproar gradually died down. 11th on the heaven leaderboard was completely crushed. He did not even have the strength to fight back. Just how strong was this unfamiliar Daoist nun? Even the first on the heaven leaderboard could not do this, right? "I'll fight you." In the midst of the silence, a clear voice suddenly sounded. Chapter 422. I'll fight with you. Taoist nun had just crushed the 11th ranked expert on the heaven leaderboard. The words, "I'll fight with you," were particularly abrupt in the silent crowd. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice with shock and confusion. Then they immediately felt relieved. Aside from heroine Lu, Who else would have the guts to stand up at this time? Some excitement appeared on their faces. They did not expect to see a fight of this level today. This trip was not in vain. The middle-aged Taoist nun stopped in her tracks and looked at the young woman who was walking toward her. She said calmly, "You're no match for me. Once you step onto this stage, your life will be in your hands." When she spoke, there was no fluctuation in her tone at all. It was as if she was talking about something that could not be more normal. "We'll know after we fight," Mississippi Lu said coldly and walked straight onto the stage. "Can Rui win?" Li Yi turned around and asked Rui. He always felt that the Taoist nun's calmness was a little scary. Just now, the 11th ranked expert did not last long before he vomited blood. For the first time, he did not have enough confidence in Mississippi Lu. "No." Rui shook her head. Her gaze was fixed on Taoist nun. Li Yi did not expect her to answer so straightforwardly. He was stunned for a moment before he walked straight onto the stage. A man on the stage was about to announce the start of the fight when he suddenly saw someone walking up. He was about to chase them away, but he shut his mouth before he could open it. As a staff member of the theater, there was no reason for him not to know the big boss. Li Yi glanced at Mississippi Lu and walked to the front of the stage. He said, "Today's fight will end here. Everyone, please come early tomorrow." Everyone was looking forward to an exciting fight between experts. They were already so excited that they could not control themselves. However, they were told to call it a day at the most crucial moment and go home to do their own things. It was as if they had already done enough foreplay. At the crucial moment, they were told that their period had arrived. What kind of mood would that be? In short, it was not a good mood. Why? "It's still early today. Tomorrow, my ass. We'll talk about it after this fight." Li Yi glanced at Mississippi Lu, then turned to the Taoist nun and said, "Taoist priest, I'm sorry. Today's competition is over. Besides, the rule here is that no one is allowed to hurt anyone. When you leave, please pay for the medical expenses of the chivalrous man just now. Thank you for your cooperation." Taoist nun only glanced at Li Yi before turning her attention back to Mississippi Lu. Right at this moment, a ferocious-looking man in a coarse shirt jumped onto the platform and said angrily, "What bullsh** early tomorrow are you talking about? I've paid for it. Don't you think I won't tear down your shitty brothel? What's your name?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. The man snorted coldly and said, "What? You want revenge? Listen up, your grandfather is Qingzhou's Tui Tong. Rank 42 on the heaven list is your grandfather." Li Yi nodded and said, "From now on, Tui Tong will be removed from the heaven list and added to the black list. He will never be on the experts list." The audience was confused by Li Yi's words. The experts list was a list recognized by the entire martial arts world. How could it be changed just because of his words? Tui Tong was also stunned for a moment. Then he laughed wildly and said, "Who do you think you are? How can you remove your name just like that? Is this brothel owned by your family?" "You're right. This brothel is indeed owned by his family." A middle-aged man walked up and said calmly, "Mr. Lu." Everyone exclaimed when they saw the middle-aged man. This Mr. Lu's real name was Lu Luo. He had outstanding strength and intelligence, but no one knew why he was working in the brothel. At this moment he stood out and said something that caused everyone to be extremely surprised. The owner of the brothel was such a young man? The most embarrassed person was Tui Tong. Lu Luo's words were like a slap to his face. His face turned green and white, but he couldn't do anything. Although Lu Luo had just recovered from his serious injuries and was nothing to be afraid of, there were countless examples before. This was not a place where he, who was ranked 42 on the heaven list, could behave atrociously. He wanted to provoke the crowd, but he didn't expect the young man to be the owner of the brothel. He could only jump off the ring at this moment. He didn't have the face to stay there any longer, so he quickly left. "Go down," Li Yi said to Mississippi Lu. He would only fight if he could win. If he couldn't win, then he would be a fool. Didn't he hear how the Taoist nun said that life and death were up to fate? If he was injured, she wouldn't even pay for the medical expenses. "Don't worry about it," Mississippi Lu looked at him and said. "I said go down," Li Yi said again, looking at her seriously. He could usually tolerate her arrogance and mischief, but this time it was a matter of life and death. Even Rui said that she was no match for this Taoist nun, so why did she have to go up and die? No matter how good her reasons were, this time she couldn't. Mississippi Lu frowned. She was about to say something, but when she saw Li Yi's expression, her heart tightened for no reason, and she swallowed the words she wanted to say. She looked at the Taoist nun and felt the pressure coming from her body. Only by experiencing the feeling of life and death would she have a chance to touch the threshold. She didn't want to give up, so she grabbed Li Yi's shoulder and threw him out of the ring. She slowly pulled out her sword, pointed at the Taoist nun and said, "Make your move." Mississippi Lu didn't use much strength. With Li Yi's current skills, he only took a few steps back and he didn't look very embarrassed. However, when he looked up at the ring, his face became gloomy, which was rare. Rui walked over, held his hand and said, "Don't worry, husband. I'll bring her back." The mood of the people below the ring began to stir again, and they looked up without blinking. Autumn water? When she looked at the sword in Mississippi Lu's hand seriously for the first time, the calm expression of the Taoist nun finally disappeared, and a trace of emotion appeared on her face. After thinking for a moment, she looked at Mississippi Lu and asked, "Who is Lu Qing to you?" Hearing this name, the expression on Mississippi Lu's face froze. "My father passed away a long time ago." Rui slowly walked to Mississippi Lu's side and said, "Go down, you're no match for this Taoist priest and you won't have the chance to learn anything." No wonder. The middle-aged Taoist nun looked at Rui with a strange gaze, then mumbled, turned around and walked down the ring. When she was about to walk down the ring, she turned back to look at Mississippi Lu and said, "You're not bad. If you have the chance to break through that realm in the future, come find me again." The middle-aged Taoist nun's figure quickly disappeared in front of the crowd, leaving them looking at each other in confusion. What was autumn water? Who was Lu Qing? What did they say about the realm of chance? What were they talking about just now? Would it kill them to not speak in riddles? They didn't get to see the battle between the peerless masters that they were looking forward to, and the protagonist left after leaving a sentence. How disappointing. The person in charge of updating the list of masters was also troubled. Taoist nun was obviously a master among masters, and she probably had the strength of the top 5 or even top 3 in the heaven list, but she didn't even leave her name, so how should the list be written? Nameless Taoist nun? In The Return of the Condor Heroes, that was popular in Wulin recently, there seemed to be such a powerful character in the opening chapter. She was also a middle-aged Taoist nun, and also held a horsetail whisk in her hand. If it wasn't for the fact that her appearance was not as beautiful as Li Mocho as described by the storytellers, it would be quite appropriate to give her the title of Scarlet Serpent Fairy. "Let's go." Rui led Mississippi Lu down the ring, and the man immediately announced on the ring that today's competition had ended. The crowd could only sigh helplessly and leave. "Where's the son-in-law?" Xiao Huan suddenly looked around and cried out in surprise. "He was here just now." Yang Liuqing also said doubtfully. Rui looked at Mississippi Lu and said, "Let's go back, maybe he went back alone." "Oh." Xiao Huan responded in a low voice, thinking that the son-in-law didn't want Second Miss to compete with that powerful Taoist nun, and Second Miss didn't listen to him, so the son-in-law must be angry. Between the son-in-law and Second Miss, whose side should she stand on? However, deep in her heart she didn't want anything to happen to Second Miss. On the way back, the 4 of them tacitly maintained their silence, but inside their thoughts were completely different. On the way back home, the anger in Li Yi's heart had not dissipated. Even though he knew that Mississippi Lu's personality was like that, knowing that she couldn't do it, but this time was different from the past. What was more important than her life? Martial arts or fame? These were all bullshit. In Li Yi's view, as long as she could live without illness or disaster, it was more important than anything else. Even if doing so would make her dissatisfied or even hate him, he wouldn't change his mind. As he thought about these things, he suddenly stopped in his tracks at a certain moment. He looked back and saw a figure standing there looking at him with a sneer. "You ruined my reputation and you want to leave just like that?" Cui Tong crossed his arms, leaned against a tree and looked at the young man in front of him mockingly. With one sentence he was removed from the heaven list, and even added to the hated blacklist in the martial arts world. He was ridiculed by all martial artists. If he didn't take revenge, the resentment in his heart would never be appeased. Originally, if the young man was with Lu Rui, he would naturally avoid the sharp edge and attack later. However, he didn't expect that the young man would swagger in front of him. Could it be that God had arranged this for him? Li looked around. This was a deserted area between the prefecture city and the brothel. What do you want? Li Yi looked at him expressionlessly. Don't worry, I naturally don't dare to kill you, but I'm afraid breaking your 2 arms and 1 leg won't be difficult. The smile on Cui Tong's face was very bright as he slowly walked over. He was not worried that Li Yi would run away. The 2 of them were so close, where could he run to? If that's the case, then I'll break your 2 arms and 1 leg. A faint voice sounded from behind Cui Tong. He didn't even have the time to turn around and dodge. There were a few whooshing sounds in the air, and 2 bloody holes appeared on both of Cui Tong's arms. At the same time, his left leg bent and his whole body fell to the ground. Looking at the middle-aged Taoist nun who was walking over, a terrified expression appeared on his face. Trembling, he said, You and I have no grievances, why? However, the Taoist nun ignored him. She walked past Li Yi and said, I don't have money to pay for that person's medicine, so I'll use this as compensation. What do you think? It's good. Li Yi nodded, then cupped his hands to the middle-aged Taoist nun and said, Junior Li Yi thanks Taoist nun for saving me, and I also thank Taoist nun for showing mercy just now. The middle-aged Taoist nun knew that he was talking about not competing with the Lu girl. She looked at him and lightly asked, Are you that girl's senior brother? Since you are from the same sect, why is your martial arts so crude? She had just heard those people talking and knew that the Lu girl, this young man, and the other girl were from the same sect. However, it was strange that the Lu girl's martial arts had already reached a higher level. Even she couldn't see the depth of the person who appeared later, who seemed to be her sister, and the person in front of her had too little Xianxia. Li Yi was a little embarrassed. The question was too straightforward and he couldn't answer it. Fortunately, the Taoist nun didn't continue to pursue the question. She said, You said that your name is Li Yi, so, the Condor shooting, and the Return of the Condor Heroes were both written by you? Li Yi silently prayed for Old Master Jin's forgiveness in his heart and shamelessly nodded. However, he was surprised in his heart. Old Man's son did a good job with the advertisement of the brothel. When did even the Taoist nun start to care about these things? Jiang Hu is not as naive and childish as you think. The Taoist nun lightly said and floated away. When Li Yi turned back, Cui Tong had also disappeared. What a strange person, Li Yi muttered in a low voice. Xiao Huan, who saw him from behind, was already waving at him. The son-in-law and the second miss had officially entered a cold war. They hadn't spoken for 2 whole days. After that day, the second miss didn't go to compete with others. She also ate in her own room. Xiao Huan saw this and remembered it, but she couldn't do anything. She could only look at the son-in-law's room and the second miss's room from time to time and sigh. In 2 days they would leave for the capital. They couldn't continue like this. The son-in-law and the second miss didn't speak. These 2 days she even deliberately lowered her voice when she walked. Inside the room, looking at Li Yi who was writing something on the table, Rui also sighed softly. However, she couldn't be more familiar with their personalities. One would never admit defeat while the other didn't care about most things, but had a bottom line that was hard to touch. Neither of them were easily submissive. Even she, who had the closest relationship with the 2 of them, could only watch and couldn't interfere. Nyang, this subordinate went to take a look at the brothel. You are currently ranked 3rd on the heaven roll. Should we take action on that matter sooner? In an ordinary inn in the prefectural city, in a guest room, a purple-clothed man half knelt in the room and spoke to a figure hidden in a loose Taoist robe. After a long silence, the middle-aged Taoist nun finally said, I didn't think that even this kind of place would have crouching tigers and hidden dragons. This matter should wait for a few more days. The purple-clothed man nodded and said, There seems to be some unforeseen events in the capital. Do you want this subordinate to go take a look? After a long time, the purple-clothed man didn't hear any movement from the room. He carefully raised his head and glanced around. Only then did he discover that other than him, there was no one else in the room. Chapter 423. In the 2nd year of Jinghe, the Jing kingdom welcomed the hottest summer in the long and impatient cicadas. This year's summer seemed to be hotter than before. Zheng Zimo had just finished a bowl of mung bean smoothie and was holding an ice pack in her hand, but she still couldn't help feeling annoyed. Of course, this annoyance had nothing to do with the weather. She paced in the room and looked at Wan Ruoqing, who was packing clothes by the bed, and asked, "Why are you leaving so soon? Can't you not go?" "No, Mr. Sun has already gone there. It must be very difficult for them to start over there," Wan Ruoqing said softly, but her hands didn't slow down. "Even you are leaving. What about me?" Zheng Zimo dropped the ice pack and asked. Wan Ruoqing looked back at her and said, "Why don't you go to the capital with us?" Zheng Zimo opened her mouth. She really didn't want to mention the place that had brought her endless nightmares. She said angrily, "Go, all of you go. You're all heartless. Just leave me here alone." Wan Ruoqing finally put down the work in her hands. Looking at Zheng Zimo running out, she shook her head helplessly. She had to go to the capital. In terms of familiarity with the operation of the brothel, even Mr. Sun couldn't compare to her. Now that they had started over in the capital, it would definitely be more difficult. She would feel a little guilty if she was left alone at home. However, once she left, Zheng Zimo would have no friends here. She couldn't even eat 3 meals a day by herself. Thinking of her, Wan Ruoqing felt a little worried. She shook her head and walked out the door. Standing in the corridor, she looked in a certain direction. They had already set off half a month ago. Now they must have already arrived in the capital. This year, the summer in the capital was really hot. If it didn't rain soon, it would probably usher in another disaster year. The words disaster year were nothing for the rich, but for most civilians, it was the boundary between life and death. Over the past few years, disasters had occurred frequently. Even Jingdo had encountered a drought that had not been seen in decades. The people at the bottom of society were already discussing whether or not the current emperor had lost his virtue and incurred the displeasure of heaven. Li Xian was dressed ordinarily as he walked on the street. The scorching sun above his head made his inner shirt wet not long after he walked. He was somewhat envious of the idlers who only wore short sleeves and wandered on the street. The hidden ice that the palace had distributed had long been used up. The emperor did not go to the summer palace to avoid the heat, so the imperial concubines could only endure the heat in the imperial palace. This caused the demand for hidden ice to increase greatly. Now even the empress could only get a small piece every day. "Young master, do you want to come in and play?" Even the voices of the girls standing at the door of the brothel were a little weak. Li Xian looked at their miserable faces that were washed with sweat. They were like monsters. He didn't even want to go in and listen to the music. "Demoness, eat my staff." A brat with bare buttocks and holding a wooden staff that was half the height of a person pointed at the girls at the door of the brothel and shouted. When the girls saw a child who was no more than 7 or 8 years old, they immediately trembled with laughter. They pointed at a small toy that was swinging in a certain part of his body and said, "Hee hee, little brother, your staff is still too small. You should come back when you grow up." If an adult man had said those words, they might have lightly scoffed and pulled him into the brothel to do some indescribable things. However, the other party was a child who didn't even have hair. He could only be used to relieve their boredom when they were sleepy. "Bah, shameless." A middle-aged woman next to the brat spat at the door of the brothel. She pulled the brat over and slapped his butt a few times. She said, "In the future, stay away from this place. Otherwise, I won't even let you go to the brothel." A few red marks appeared on his butt. The brat was about to cry, but he was scared by the woman's last sentence and swallowed his tears back. Not letting him go to the brothel was something that was countless times scarier than a spanking. "Evil spirits, I'll deal with you when I grow up." The brat wiped his tears and put the wooden staff on his shoulder. As he followed his mother home, he silently said in his heart. Li Xian felt that the brat's words were somewhat familiar, as if he had heard them somewhere before. However, he couldn't remember where he had heard them before. He just thought that they were the dirty words he had heard when he went to the brothel and listened to the music. "Hey, what's going on in front?" Li Xian looked up and saw that there was a huge crowd in front of him. There were a few queues that stretched from the shop to the street. Li Xian asked curiously. A man behind him immediately walked up and returned after a while. He said, "Your Highness, this shop is selling something called green bean smoothie. However, I don't know why there are so many people buying it." Green bean smoothie? He had never heard of this name before. Li Xian revealed a look of interest and said, "Let's go take a look." A moment later, the guard who had spent a tael of silver to enter the VIP passage quickly came out again. This time there were a few more bowls in his hands. Li Xian casually took one. It was cold to the touch. He tasted it with a wooden spoon and immediately felt a refreshing coolness. He said in surprise, "Even the palace doesn't have any ice in storage. Who is the owner of this shop? How can he be so extravagant?" This green bean smoothie must have been made with ice, but the price was so low. It must be known that ice was hard to find in the capital, so how could someone sell it at such a low price? He quickly finished the smoothie in the bowl and immediately felt his body become much more relaxed. Li Xian raised his head and saw the signboard of the shop. The words Rui Workshop were impressively imprinted in his eyes. But the bowl in his hand fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. "He's back." Seeing the crown prince's excited expression, the guards were all stunned. "I was too impulsive that day." "Impulsive? I was wrong." "What did you do wrong?" "Hesitating and not admitting your mistake is good enough." "I don't accept it. Let's do it again." "Don't go too far." Mississippi Lu narrowed her eyes and looked at Li Yi. The atmosphere was a little tense. Li Yi widened his eyes and looked back at her, unwilling to be outdone. He was just staring at each other. Who was afraid of who? If she didn't learn her lesson this time, she would still foolishly fight with her life on the line when she knew she couldn't win. "It's been the time for a joss stick to burn." Xiaohuan rubbed her sore eyes. The son-in-law and second miss had been staring at each other for the time for a joss stick to burn. Guys, wouldn't their eyes be sore? Li Yi's eyes were really sore. He was very regretful. He shouldn't have stared so wide just now. "That's all for today." Truce. The iced grape wine on the table was almost done. He rubbed his eyes and was about to reach out his hand when he saw a flash in front of him. The wine pot on the table was gone. Mississippi Lu snorted coldly and only left him a cold back. It was noon on the third day of the 6th month of the second year of Jinghe. Most people in the capital were still complaining because of the hot weather. Li Yi's iced grape wine was snatched away by Mississippi Lu. Jingdi had just taken a panacea and was about to take a short rest. Prince Jin pulled Yongning's little face and laughed proudly. There was a big banquet in the Shu King's mansion. People sang and danced. Qin Yu, who had been grounded for 2 months, walked out of the Qin mansion. It was also at this time that the crown prince angrily stepped into the gate of the Viscount's mansion. Chapter 424. "Where is your Lord Zhu?" Li Xian asked the maidservant who was cleaning the courtyard as soon as he entered the door. The maidservant named Shao Qing, who was sprinkling water to cool down the courtyard, was startled. The brocade handkerchief that was wrapped in ice fell out of her arms. She trembled and said, in the inner residence." Li Xian strode inside. When he was about to pass through the moon gate, he turned back and asked, "How many days has your Lord Zhu been back?" "Yes, it's been a few days." The maidservant, who was startled, was still in a daze. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince walked straight into the Viscount's mansion, as if he was entering an uninhabited place. None of the servants dared to stop him. This Crown Prince had come to the Viscount's mansion many times in the past few months. Who didn't know His Royal Highness the Crown Prince? Who dared to be presumptuous in front of him? Li Yi was lying on the rocking chair. On the table was a jug of grape wine that had just been chilled. There was a huge block of ice placed in the 4 corners of the room. The room was cool and didn't feel stuffy at all. Xiaohuan took the grapes out of the ice water, peeled them and carefully put them into his mouth. At that moment Li Xian, who was sweating profusely and looking haggard, appeared before him. When Li Xian stepped into the room, he just saw Li Yi lying leisurely on the rocking chair. The maidservant was putting grapes into his mouth. He had worked so hard these days, but he was enjoying it so much. Didn't his conscience hurt? Too much, you. Such a sharp contrast caused Li Xian's heart to burn with anger. He pointed at Li Yi and was just about to berate him when he suddenly shivered. The difference between the unbearably hot and unbearably cool was only a step away. The strong contrast caused him to freeze in place for a moment. Grape wine, it's better to have it chilled. Sitting on a rocking chair next to Li Yi, Li Xian took a sip of wine with one hand and closed his eyes. After a while he sighed with emotion. It had been a long time since he had drunk chilled grape wine. Ever since the amount of ice given to him in the palace had decreased, chilled grape wine had become a luxury. The Shitsi Fei was afraid of the heat, so he sent all the ice to her room. At night, of course, he also slept in her room. At this time, how could he still care about reprimanding Li Yi? He only felt his entire body relax. Even if he had to lie here for the rest of his life, he was willing. At the same time, he finally began to understand why Li Yi had such a special liking for such a chair. You've been back for so long, why didn't you send a message to the prince's residence? Li Xian lay on his back looking at the ceiling. Even his voice was a little weak. Before you bother me, I should at least have a few days of comfort. The second bottle of grape wine was snatched away by Li Xian. This impolite guy actually drank from the bottle. Where had all the royal etiquette gone? Li Yi said unhappily. Then are you comfortable enough? Li Xian asked. Li Yi asked in reply, since you're here, is there any difference whether it's enough or not? Oh. Li Xian said honestly. His Majesty is sick and hasn't gotten better for a month. You have to come with me to the palace to have a look. Even the imperial doctors can't do anything. What can I see? Li Yi indicated that Xiao Huan didn't need to feed him and said with his hands behind his head. The imperial doctors can't do anything, but that doesn't mean you can't either. Li Xian turned to look at him and said, time is of the essence, we have to leave immediately. To him, Li Xian was like a jinx. The moment he saw him, Li Yi knew that his good days were over. There were 2 ice buckets in the spacious carriage. Li Yi pinched a piece of crushed ice and put it in his mouth to chew. He looked at Li Xian in surprise and asked, I haven't seen you for a few months, why is your complexion so bad? Could it be that the crown princess is really powerful? It's not that I want to criticize you, but young people should know how to control themselves, or else you'll regret it in the future. It was said that the more gentle a woman looked, the more passionate she was inside. Seeing Li Xian's expression, Li Yi knew that there was some truth in this saying. Where did you get all that ice in your house? Li Xian's mind was clearly not on that matter as he stared at the ice buckets in the carriage. I made it myself. Li Yi leaned against the soft cushion and said lazily. You can make ice in the middle of summer? Li Xian asked with wide eyes. The swaying of the carriage made one dizzy. Li Yi closed his eyes and said, you can fly into the sky, why can't I make ice in the middle of summer? Li Xian didn't dwell on this question and said, all right, I'll send someone to your house to get it tonight. It's best to send some to the palace as well. The ice stored in the palace has been very tight these days. What was a bad friend? It was a friend who would always disrupt one's life and always like to use one's things as a favor. Li Xian could be called a model in this regard. The weather was hot. Although the Yamen didn't have a holiday, the officials didn't have to work hard to go to court every day. The Bowen Hall was unbearably hot. According to Li Xian, 3 of the teachers who taught the princes and princesses had fainted from the heat in 2 days, so it was difficult to see other people in the palace. Li Yi and Li Xian got off the carriage in front of the palace gate and happened to see a few figures waiting at the gate. Seeing a few bald heads shining under the sun, Li Yi walked over and said with a smile, Master Tan Yin, long time no see. Ba, so it's young benefactor Li Yi, the old monk Tan Yin said with a smile as he gave a Buddhist salute. Master, are you going to enter the palace? Li Yi asked as he looked at the monks. These monks didn't even wear a hat to cover the scorching sun. He was afraid that their heads would be offended when they returned at night. We are waiting for His Majesty's summons, the old monk Tan Yin said with a nod. The 2 hadn't spoken for long when a carriage sped over from afar. A few azure-clothed Daoist priests got off the carriage and indifferently glanced at the monks. Of course they also left Li Yi out. They only showed their tokens to the guards and swaggered into the palace gate. Li Yi thought, as expected of the orthodoxy, these Daoist priests were treated much better than the monks. At the very least, they didn't have to stand at the palace gate to bask in the sun at noon. We still have important matters to attend to. Master, let's talk another day. Li Xian bowed to the old monk Tan Yin and walked through the palace gate with Li Yi. As they passed by the Bowen Hall, Li Yi subconsciously glanced in a certain direction. He hadn't expected to leave the capital for so long. He wondered how Yongning had been recently. This time he wasn't disappointed. From afar he saw a young girl dressed in palace attire sitting on the steps in the shadows. She stared blankly ahead, still maintaining that familiar posture. A smile appeared on Li Yi's face and he quickly walked over there. At this moment, a round figure suddenly appeared at the corner of the palace. Prince Jin Li Han quickly ran over. He pulled Yongning's little face and said loudly, I don't know why Imperial Father always gives you so much ice. The two of us combined don't have as much as you. Quickly give me half of your ice or I'll beat you up. They were all princes and princesses, so why did Yongning always get more ice than them? Yongning was a motherless child, so Prince Jean felt very unbalanced. Li Han pulled the young girl's face. It was very strange. This time she wasn't as silly as before. Even when she was being bullied, she didn't move. Instead, she raised her head and looked behind him. It's useless to look anywhere. In the palace, other than Imperial Father, who would? Li Han said as he turned his head. Li Han made a strange sound in his throat. Time seemed to stop at this moment. Suddenly, Li Han's hand moved away from Yongning's face as if it was bitten by a poisonous snake. He looked at the figure in front of him and his round face turned deathly pale. In the extremely hot weather, Monarch Jean suddenly felt a little cold. In the clear sky, there seemed to be endless black clouds rolling and rolling, pressing down on him from the front. Chapter 425. Your Highness Prince Jean is so leisurely. Did you finish all the math homework? Li Yi looked at Li Han calmly and said, That's right. For 4 months, even if your Highness only read for half an hour a day, it's more than enough. Starting tomorrow, I will make up for the homework that I owe you. Tomorrow I will see you in the Bowen Hall. Your Highness Prince Jean, don't be late. Li Han's forehead was full of cold sweat. A few months ago he had already torn the math textbook to pieces. What, half an hour a day? He didn't even want to waste half an hour on that boring thing. Father said that the weather is too hot, we don't need to go to the palace school these days. Li Han stuttered. It was very difficult to eliminate the fear of the first impression. Li Yi smiled and said, it doesn't matter. When the heaven is about to give a person a great responsibility, he must first suffer his will and bones. This heat is nothing. I will report to His Majesty in a while. Your Highness Prince Jean doesn't need to worry anymore. Ignoring Prince Jean, who was stunned, Li Yi squatted down and rubbed Yongning's little face. He asked, I'm sorry, it's been so long since I came to see you. Are you still hungry now? The little girl shook her head and took out a bulging brocade handkerchief from her sleeve. She put it on Li Yi's palm. The handkerchief was cold and wet to the touch. Li Yi opened it to take a look and found that there was a block of ice inside. After giving the remaining ice to Li Yi, the little girl turned around and walked to the palace next to her. It's important to see His Majesty. Li Yi watched her little figure disappear in the palace. Li Xian's voice came to his ears. You do come here. Li Yi waved his hand to the 2 eunuchs who were standing not far away. What is Zhu Ye's order? The 2 eunuchs who planned to go back with Princess Yongning immediately trotted over. Li Yi pointed in the direction of the palace gate and gave them a few instructions. He then glanced at the palace where Yongning was at before walking deeper into the palace with Li Xian. After a while, Prince Jean Li Han saw the 2 eunuchs who had just left, each carrying a huge wooden barrel coming from the palace gate. When the 2 of them walked past him, they brought with them a comfortable cool breeze. Li Han glanced at the wooden bucket and saw the ice cubes that almost took up the entire bucket. His eyes couldn't help but widen like saucers. These 2 buckets of ice cubes added together were equivalent to his monthly quota. At this moment he really wanted to hug this ice cube and have a good sleep. However, when this unrealistic thought dissipated, he finally realized something even more terrifying. That devil was back. His good days were finally coming to an end. Her Majesty has just fallen asleep. Your Highness, please wait in the side hall first. When Her Majesty wakes up, this servant will go and inform Her Majesty. The eunuch at the entrance of the side hall said in a low voice. Forget it. It's even more stuffy inside the palace. Let's wait here. Li Xian stood in the shade under the porch. The breeze was blowing. It felt good. This position was definitely much cooler than inside the palace. One could tell just by looking at the few fellows in Daoist robes whose faces were drenched in sweat. Although it might be cool to roll up their sleeves and fan themselves like Li Yi did, the royal etiquette he had received since he was young did not allow him to do such a thing. He began to miss that bottle of iced grape wine. This is the palace. Can't you behave yourself? Li Yi was fanning with all his might when he suddenly heard a voice. He turned his head and saw Her Highness standing under the porch and looking at him. With a lady present, this action was somewhat unsightly. Li Yi had no choice but to pull down his sleeves and tidy up his clothes. the palace was not as comfortable as home. If it was just him and Rui, they only needed a piece of cloth to cover their private parts. When did you return to the capital? Mingzu walked over and asked. I just came back a few days ago. Li Yi dodged the question. Mingzu wanted to ask more, but two guards came over with a few monks. Greetings, Your Highness. Master Sandine put his palms together and said. Master, you don't have to be so polite. Even if she was a princess, it was not appropriate to put on airs in front of a virtuous monk. Mingzu returned the greeting. Father has just fallen asleep. Master, please wait in the side hall. Li Yi was a little curious. What kind of sparks would there be when monks and Taoists were in the same room? Although they both made a living by conning people and could be considered to be in the same profession, monks and Taoists generally did not see eye to eye with each other. Buddhism and Taoism had to compete for believers and incense. Resources were limited. If one side had more, the other side would naturally have less. Over time, a feud would naturally be formed. Although Taoism was the orthodox state religion of the Jing Kingdom, its development in the Jing Kingdom was far behind that of Buddhism. They could not compete with each other for incense and believers, so naturally they would not be nice to the monks. In the face of their unfriendly gazes, the young monks behind Master Sandine glared back. May I know why Master has entered the palace? Since he had nothing to do, Li Yi walked over and chatted with Master Sandine in a low voice. Master Sandine said, His Majesty is unwell. At the invitation of Her Majesty, I brought my disciples to recite scriptures to cure His Majesty's illness. After listening to Master Sandine's words, Li Yi somewhat understood why, although Buddhism was prosperous, Taoists were still more favored in the palace. There was no other reason. No matter what happened, monks could only recite scriptures, pray to Buddha, and perform rituals. These things could also be done by Taoists. They would put on their Taoist robes, casually recite a few words that no one could understand, dance a few times with their peachwood swords, and then recite a few lines of Taishang Laojun is as urgent as the law. They would jump back and forth a few times looking like they were doing something. But other than these, Taoists could also refine pills. The various pills refined by Taoists were very popular in the circle of the nobility in the capital. Eating one would prolong one's life, eating two would make one immortal, and eating three would immediately cause one to ascend to the heavens and become an immortal. Although none of these had ever been realized, it could not stop these people's rock-solid dreams of longevity. However, a wise and far-sighted person like the old emperor would probably not do something that would bring about his own destruction. Since ancient times, there had not been any emperors who could prolong their life by consuming pills. There were many who had died, but it was unknown whether they had become immortals or not. Could it be that he wanted these monks and Taoists to join forces to perform a ritual? Thinking about it, it would be quite interesting. But who knew if Buddha and Taoist would fight in the sky? What are these Taoists doing? Li Yi walked over and whispered to Mingzu. These Taoists from the Imperial Astronomer are here to deliver pills to Imperial Father, Mingzu explained. Father's illness is all thanks to the pills they refined. Li Yi's expression froze. He looked at Mingzu in shock. What did you say? What's wrong? Seeing the expression on Li Yi's face, Mingzu suddenly had a bad feeling. Could it be that Your Majesty has been eating those useless pills? Li Yi raised his voice and asked again. The old emperor really dared to eat anything. Was he looking forward to his early death? Shut up. Inside the hall, an old Taoist with the demeanor of an immortal stood up and pointed at Li Yi. Who are you? How dare you speak such arrogant words and slander the sacred medicine of Taoism? Chapter 426. The old Daoist priest's hair and beard were all white. If it wasn't for his flushed face and his furious glare at Li Yi, he would look like an immortal in everyone's eyes. He didn't mean it, please don't be angry. Mingzu hurriedly walked over and said when she saw the unhappy expressions on the Daoist priests' faces. Although the Imperial Astronomer was under the jurisdiction of the Imperial Court, these Daoist priests were not just officials, especially the old Daoist priest in front of them. He had an extremely high reputation in Taoism, and even the emperor treated him with respect. All the officials and nobles in the capital yearned for the miraculous pills he concocted to prolong their lives. How can I not be angry when you insult my Taoism for no reason? The old Daoist priest was obviously still angry. He pointed at Li Yi and asked, "Tell me, why are my pills useless?" Ever since the appearance of the 5 minerals powder, taking pills had become one of the hobbies of the rich and powerful in ancient times. In order to prolong their lives and become immortals, the number of pill masters began to increase explosively. Mercury, gold, lead, whatever was more important, they used it to concoct pills. Taking pills became the norm. When they had nothing to do, they would meet up with a few friends to take pills. That was the culture of society. What else could Li Yi say? This was the modern era. Gathering a crowd to take drugs would cause them to go to jail for life. It was obvious that Taoism had not changed from external alchemy to internal alchemy. Li Yi had no intention of explaining to the old Daoist what heavy metal poisoning was. A group of people were going crazy from wanting to become immortals. This was the same as telling the old monk Tan Yin that his Buddha was useless. Even Li Xian, Mingzu, and the old emperor believed that taking pills was useful. What he said was meaningless. "My apologies, I misspoke just now. May I ask if you can let me take a look at that holy pill?" Li Yi cupped his hands at the old Daoist priest. Remember not to be careless in the future. Although the old Daoist was still somewhat angry, he did not continue to make things difficult for him when he saw that he was with Princess Yongle. He took out a brocade box from his sleeve and carefully opened it. The old Taoist was very cautious with this pill. He held it himself and did not let Li Yi touch it. He stared at Li Yi as if he would take his hand back at any time. Li Yi looked at the pill in the box. This pill was about the size of a quail's egg and was dark red in color. It actually reflected light, and under the sunlight it looked very strange. Other than mercury sulfide, which was also known as cinnabar, what else could have such an effect? It seemed that these Daoist priests' alchemy techniques were still very traditional. Since they had mercury, they must have added a lot of lead as well. Gold powder, silver powder. Not sure if they had added anything else. Li Yi looked at the white-haired old Daoist priest and thought to himself that he would never eat the alchemy that he had refined himself. "I'll go back first." Not long after, Li Yi looked away from the pill and did not look at the old Daoist priest again. He said something to Li Xian and turned to walk out of the hall. Sigh. Li Xian stretched out his hand, but before he could say anything, Li Yi had already walked out of the door. He and Mingzu looked at each other and chased after him helplessly. He did not expect that Li Yi would actually have a conflict with these Daoist priests. One had to know that when facing these people, even he and Mingzu could not say or do anything. Li Yi walked in the direction of the palace gate alone. Only a fool would come out on such a hot day. Anyway, the old emperor did not have long to live. Although he would definitely die after eating those pills, at least in the early stages he could still feel the cheerfulness of the gods and the improvement of his physical strength. Otherwise, there would not be so many people in the world who believed in it. "Lordly?" Suddenly a slightly surprised voice came from behind. Li Yi stopped and saw a person running out from a small palace at the side. "Oh, it's Imperial Physician Lu." Li Yi saluted him. The person who came was the Imperial Physician Lu Jimin, whom he met once in Qingyan Prefecture. Imperial Physician Lu said with a smile, "It's really Lord Li. We haven't seen each other for more than half a year since we parted at Qingyan Prefecture. I didn't expect to meet you in the palace today. In front of us is the Imperial Physician's Bureau. Would Lord Li like to go in and have a cup of tea? It just so happened that it was a little hot on the way here." Li Yi thought for a moment and then nodded and said, "Thank you, Imperial Physician Lu. Lord Li is too polite. Please." Imperial Physician Lu smiled and reached out his hand. "This Imperial Physician's Bureau is quite cool." Li Yi sat on the chair, took a sip of tea and said, "Speaking of which, I haven't thanked Lord Li in person for offering the wound suturing technique. Lord Li is kind and generous, and everything you do is for the benefit of the people. On behalf of the people in the world, I thank Lord Li." Imperial Physician Lu sat opposite him, cupped his fists and said. He had heard this sentence from Imperial Physician Lu last time. Li Yi waved his hand and seemed to think of something. He suddenly asked, "Lord Lu has always been responsible for His Majesty's illness, right?" Imperial Physician Lu was stunned for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "My colleagues and I have been trying to find a way to cure His Majesty's illness, but there has been no progress. I don't know why His Majesty's illness suddenly worsened a month ago. Even I can't do anything." Fortunately, the imperial astronomer and a few Daoist priests offered sacred medicine so that His Majesty's illness did not worsen further. Li Yi sighed. Even the current imperial physician said so. It could be seen that this kind of thinking was deeply rooted in everyone's mind. Even if countless people had died because of this thing, in order to strengthen that illusory belief, they could always find suitable reasons. For example, the raw materials for refining the elixir were not chosen properly, the temperature of refining the elixir was not controlled well, and even the death of the emperor could be said to have become an immortal. If the old emperor really became an immortal, it was unknown whether the heads of these imperial physicians and Daoist priests could be kept. Imperial physician Lu, do you really think that the elixir worked? Li Yi took another sip of tea and said lightly. Imperial physician Lu glanced at him and his expression gradually froze. He stood up from his seat, looked at Li Yi and said carefully, Lord Li, please explain clearly. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Lord Lu, do you know what was used to refine the elixir? Imperial physician Lu shook his head. What he learned was medical skills, not alchemy. His specialty was not the same. How would he know what was used to refine those pills? What's more, which one of those alchemists didn't value their own pill formula more than their own life? How would other people know? Cinnabar, lead powder and maybe gold and silver powder. Li Yi stood up, patted Imperial physician Lu's shoulder and said, Lord Lu, take care. Every time Li Yi said a word, Imperial physician Lu's face became a bit paler. When he finished his sentence, the Imperial physician's face had already lost all color. Plop. After Li Yi's figure disappeared from the Imperial physician's office, Imperial physician Lu finally couldn't help but collapse to the ground. Lord Lu, what's wrong with you? The officials of the Imperial physician's office immediately rushed up. After an unknown amount of time, Imperial physician Lu finally came back to his senses and said anxiously, quickly go and invite Lord Li back. When the people of the Imperial physician's office were going crazy under the scorching sun, Li Yi was leisurely lying on the rocking chair, tasting the iced grape wine and eating the fruit salad that the little maid had personally fed him. He only felt that every pore on his body was about to open up. This was life. It was thousands of times better than going to the imperial palace to suffer in such a hot day. Li Xian came in from the outside sweating profusely. After hugging a piece of ice from the corner of the room, he didn't let it go. He sat opposite of Li Yi and asked while gasping for breath, What happened to you just now? Is there a problem with the elixir? Li Xian didn't understand why Li Yi's attitude changed so much when he heard about the elixir. He was puzzled in his heart, so he specially came back to ask. There's no big problem. Li Yi shook his head and said, If His Majesty doesn't take those elixirs, at most a few years at least, only 1 or 2 years of lifespan. Hearing this, Li Xian's expression darkened. Then he thought that if the elixir could extend his lifespan by a few years, it could be considered a very good ending. He asked, What if he takes the elixir? Although heavy metal poisoning needed time to slowly accumulate, since those Daoist priests dared to take it out to the emperor, they must have already experimented with it. That kind of dosage should not have any problems in a short period of time. However, the old emperor's body was already very bad. After thinking for a while, Li Yi gave Li Xian a conservative number. 2 months. What? 2 months? Li Xian suddenly jumped up from the chair. The ice in his arms fell to the ground and shattered. Chapter 427. Why? Because he was too shocked, Li Xian's voice trembled as he spoke. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Do you believe that there is something that can prolong one's life and make them immortal after eating it? Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then he turned around and walked outside. I'll go and capture those Daoists immediately. He didn't know if there was such a thing, but if Li Yi said there was no such thing, then there was definitely no such thing. Wait. Li Yi stopped him. This matter wasn't anyone's fault, but the world's understanding of the so-called pills. Which emperor didn't want to live forever? There were so many emperors in history who knew that taking pills was harmful to their bodies, but didn't they still take them? Whether it was a commoner or a noble, death was a very terrifying thing for most people. The upper class was all taking pills, so who would believe them if they were told that doing so was actually courting death? So many people were dreaming of immortality. Even Li Xian didn't realize what kind of resistance he would encounter. I have to tell Uncle Huang immediately. Li Xian turned around and said, Then he turned around and was about to leave. Who do you think will believe you? Li asked. Li Xian's footsteps stopped, and after standing on the spot for a long time he walked back dispiritedly, hugged another piece of ice, sat back down and said, "Then what should we do? Tell me." A long time ago, Li Xian understood that this was the most effective way to solve problems and difficulties that he couldn't solve. What's the hurry? Anyway, we've already taken so many pills, 1 or 2 more won't matter. Do you want to eat some grapes? Li Yi waved his hand and said. Can you be more serious? Li Xian's eyelids couldn't help but twitch as he looked at him and asked. Are you going to eat or not? Yes. These grapes are not bad, I'll take some back later, the princess likes sweet things. Li Xian spat out the grape skin and said. No more. While eating a bunch of grapes he didn't forget to show his affection. Li Yi simply refused his unreasonable request. What should we do? After eating the grapes, Li Xian's expression finally became serious. Wait, Li Yi said. Wait for what? Waiting for someone. Before Li Xian could ask again, Li Yi pointed to the door and said, They're here. Lord Li, you must help us. Imperial physician Lu Jimin walked into the room with a pale face. It had only been 2 hours since they last met, but his complexion had become much more haggard. He definitely couldn't let the old emperor continue to take those elixirs. Li Yi still hoped that the old emperor could live for another 2 years, so that the effect of his token would always be there. If he really waited for the king of Shu to rise to power, he didn't think that he would have a good life. However, this matter couldn't be directly said. The temptation of longevity and immortality was very big, and Li Yi didn't think that he had the ability to change the world. If he stood out and disagreed, he would be treated as a fool. If they liked to take elixirs, then let them take them. It was healthier to take them. Anyway, since those things could be passed down to the present, there wouldn't be any problems in a few years. If they liked to dream, then let them. He just wanted to take care of his own affairs. As for the old emperor's health, perhaps even he himself didn't care as much as imperial physician Lu. If the old emperor suddenly passed away because of taking elixirs, no one knew what would happen to the other imperial physicians, but this imperial physician definitely wouldn't be able to escape. Lord Lu, don't worry. If you have anything to say, sit down and talk slowly. Li Yi said with a smile. Li Xian finally breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that Li Yi had already made arrangements. He looked at him with a somewhat resentful gaze. If he had said it earlier, he wouldn't have been so worried just now. At this time, imperial physician Lu also gradually calmed down. He knew that since Li Yi could remind him, he wouldn't just sit back and do nothing. He carefully said, Lord Li, please enlighten me. Letting the emperor stop taking elixirs was not a decision that he could make alone. There were too many things involved, and if he wasn't careful he could lose his head. Xiaohuan, give me one of your hawthorn pills. Li Yi turned his head and said to the little maidservant. Xiaohuan usually carried a small treasure bag with her, which was filled with various snacks. When she heard Li Yi's words, she immediately took out a thumb-sized round thing wrapped in white paper. After handing it to Li Yi, she didn't forget to take out one for herself and put it into her mouth. Hawthorn pills were sweet and sour. Even if you ate too much, you wouldn't fall out. She still had a lot of them in her treasure bag. Lord Lu, take a look. What do you think of this thing? Li Yi opened the white paper that wrapped the hawthorn pill and handed it to Imperial Physician Lu. Lord Li, this... Imperial Physician Lu looked at the thing in his hand and then looked at Li Yi. He wanted to say something but stopped. This was just an ordinary hawthorn pill. It had only appeared in the capital not long ago. His grandson liked it very much. He didn't understand what this thing had to do with the emperor's illness. Believing that Li Yi's action must have a purpose, Imperial Physician Lu looked at his hand again and said, This hawthorn pill has a bright color. It can help children to eliminate stagnation. Now that the weather is hot, it's very useful. Hearing Imperial Physician Lu's words, Li Xian shamelessly asked Xiao Huan for one. He held it in his hand and began to study it. This hawthorn pill is very similar to the pill that the Imperial Physicians Bureau has recently developed to treat the emperor's chronic illness. Li Yi looked at Imperial Physician Lu and said. Lu Jimin froze for a moment. When did the Imperial Physicians Bureau develop a pill to treat the emperor's chronic illness? This hawthorn pill had nothing to do with it. Li Yi shook his head again and said, It's just that the taste is a bit off. If it was a bit more bitter, I'm afraid it could be passed off as genuine. Lord Li, when did the Imperial Physician's Bureau? Imperial Physician Lu was even more confused. Halfway through his words, he raised his head and looked at Li Yi. He suddenly froze and the wrinkles on his old face gradually smoothed out. Don't worry about the taste. If it's too sweet, just soak it in coptis juice. Imperial Physician Lu stood up and respectfully bowed to Li Yi and said, Thank you, Lord Li. Lu and my colleagues will never forget Lord Li's kindness. Li Xian chewed the hawthorn pill in his mouth and looked at the back of Imperial Physician Lu, hurriedly leaving with a dumbfounded face. What are you guys talking about? He looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion. At this moment, His Royal Highness had a feeling that his brain wasn't enough to process what was going on. Eat your hawthorn pill. Li Yi put his hands behind his head and leaned on the rocking chair. As he swayed, Xiao Huan obediently massaged his shoulders. Sure enough, old people become shrewd. Imperial Physician Lu looked so honest, but with just a little reminder, the evil thoughts in his stomach immediately came out. The Emperor's illness was actually a terminal illness. No matter if it was now or in the future, there was no effective cure. However, although it was difficult to live a long life, he wouldn't die in a short period of time. The summer was so hot that ordinary people were so stuffy that they couldn't breathe. How could a person with asthma be any better? He didn't need to take any pills. As long as he paid more attention to the details of his life, didn't overwork, didn't drink alcohol, did a good job of preventing heat stroke and maintained air circulation, his illness would naturally improve. Eating a hawthorn pill was also very good to stimulate his appetite. He just didn't know if the hawthorn pill soaked in coptis juice would still be effective. Chapter 428. The farmers of the manor where the Viscount's mansion was located had been very comfortable these days. On such a hot day, they could do nothing but go to the newly built brothel in front of the manor to watch shows, listen to music and spend a copper coin to buy a bowl of mung bean smoothie to eat. It was so comfortable. For some reason, even though it was noon, the inside of the brothel didn't feel stuffy at all. On the contrary, it was very cool. The mung bean smoothie was sold outside for 10 coppers per bowl, and the farmers in the brothel could eat to their heart's content for 1 copper coin. Everyone in the brothel praised this Lord Zhou. As for the farmers who helped in the brothel, they even saved a copper coin. When they went home, they could even hold a piece of ice to cool their wives and children. Ice was a rare thing on such a hot day. It was said that only the palace had it. Because of this, the farmers had received many envious gazes from the neighboring villages. And the servants of the Li family were naturally the most comfortable. Even the maids who cleaned the courtyard could wrap a piece of ice in a brocade handkerchief and hide it in their arms. If they were thirsty and hot, they could go to the kitchen to get free mung bean soup to drink. It was all chilled. They could sit in the corridor and chat while enjoying the cool without worrying about being scolded by the master. As long as they were smart, diligent and did their jobs well, even the most serious steward Li wouldn't scold them. Working as a servant in the Viscount's mansion, they had more time to rest than to work every day. They had never thought that being a servant could be like this. Every minute they felt as if they had reached the peak of their lives and they could live like this for the rest of their lives. Li Yi found that he might have been used to being busy in Qing'an Prefecture. After a few days of idleness, he felt a little itchy. He prepared for classes and thought about other things at the same time. Li Xian threw all the account books of many shops to him. Li Yi just skimmed through them and threw them all away. The hotter the weather was, the better the sales of perfume and rui nectar were. The money was brought back by carts. Li Yi was considering whether to further expand the ice-making workshop. If he sold mung bean smoothie to civilians and ice cubes at a high price to those who were not short of money, such as the dignitaries in the capital or the emperor, he should be able to make a lot of money. The initial construction of the brothel was going to burn a lot of money. At present they had to make use of all possible means to earn money. Old Man Sun and the others had already established a foothold in Jingdou, but because of a lack of manpower, they could not continue to expand. If they wanted to reach the level of prosperity of Qing'an Fu, it might still take a long time. Yong Ning's illness had always been on his mind, but there had been no progress so far. She was still very resistant to outsiders and never spoke to him. After sorting out his thoughts, Li Yi realized that he still had a lot of things to do. Just as Li Yi was writing those strange numbers and symbols on the paper in the palace, Prince Jin Li Han, was sweating profusely as he ran into a palace. He shook a prince who was taking a nap and said, "Li Xiang, have you finished your math homework? Brother, what are you doing?" A 7 or 8-year-old boy rubbed his sleepy eyes and said with dissatisfaction, "Don't ask so much. Tell me, have you done your math homework?" Li Han asked anxiously. "No." The young man mumbled, turned around and went back to sleep. That's good, that's good." Li Han quickly ran out and quickly rushed into another palace. Not long after, he ran out of the palace with a smile on his chubby face. He murmured, "Sister Xianing, Li Xiang and Li Mo didn't do it. The others didn't do it either. What do I have to be afraid of? Is he going to hit all of our hands?" For a moment, Li Han was completely relaxed. With his hands behind his back, he swaggered towards his palace. The weather was as hot as ever and there was no more ice to be bestowed today. Yong Ning seemed to have a lot, but he didn't dare to rob her anymore. "Steward Chong, long time no see." When he saw Chong Da at the palace gate, Li Yi raised his hand to greet him. "Indeed, long time no see. County Magistrate Li, you really ran far this time," Chong Da said indifferently. Eunuchs always spoke in a strange tone and Li Yi was already used to it. The next moment he heard him say, "His Majesty wants to see you. Come with me." The old emperor summoned him at the right time. He deliberately didn't eat breakfast when he left home in the morning, so he was a little hungry now. "All right, no need to be so polite." When he walked into the palace, before he had time to salute, Emperor Jing waved his hand and asked, "Is there really a problem with the elixir I took?" Jing Di leaned against the headboard of the bed. His complexion was undoubtedly much worse than the last time Li Yi saw him. Li Yi looked at Li Xian and Emingzu who were standing by the bed and then looked at Emperor Jing. He said helplessly, "That elixir is not good for His Majesty's illness." "Right, I understand. You can leave." A trace of imperceptible sadness appeared in Emperor Jing's eyes. He waved his hand and said. Li Yi and the other two left the palace. Li Xian said, "Including the imperial physician, several officials of the Imperial Physician Bureau have been fined half a year's salary. Since it has happened, it is impossible to hide it from Uncle Huang." Li Yi waved his hand. This ending was already very good. Half a year's salary was better than losing their heads. The officials of the Imperial Physician Bureau might be celebrating now. In this case, it was up to the old emperor to decide whether to take the elixir or not. He was going to deal with Prince Jin now. He was going to teach the princes and princesses a lesson. Yesterday he had asked Emingzu to ask the old emperor. Li Yi walked quickly in the direction of Bowen Hall. At this time in the main hall, Emperor Jing looked in a certain direction and murmured, "Is the so-called longevity really illusory? Doesn't His Majesty already have the answer in his heart?" A voice came from there and a middle-aged Taoist in a blue robe came out from behind the pillar. The middle-aged Taoist had black hair and a ruddy complexion. There were no wrinkles, but the vicissitudes of life in his eyes were extremely inconsistent with his appearance. "How is it?" Emperor Jing looked away and looked at him. "I can't see clearly." The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and said. Emperor Jing wondered, "There is someone that Taoist Yuan can't see clearly?" The middle-aged Taoist smiled and said, "The way of heaven is unpredictable. It is already a great fortune for me to be able to see 1 or 2 out of 10,000. What's more, since His Majesty has decided to let me see him, then what difference does it make to His Majesty whether I see him or not?" Emperor Jing did not ask again this time. The expression on his face was thoughtful. In the main hall there was a long silence. Today's Bowen Hall was not hot. After all, the princes and princesses enjoyed special privileges. Huge ice cubes were placed in the ice mirror, and in the 4 corners of the hall, there were eunuchs holding huge feather fans, sparing no effort to fan the air. The hall was naturally cool, which made the princes feel that it was much better than the palaces they lived in. "Today is the first class. Everyone should first hand in the homework that I left behind a few months ago." Li Yi sat in front and glanced at the princes and princesses. Prince Jin Li Han sat below, the corners of his mouth twitching disdainfully. "Everyone did not take your words seriously. Let's see how you clean up later." At this moment Princess Xianing stood up and walked up with a thin booklet in her hand. Then Prince Fu Li Xiang. Prince Shou Li Mo, Princess Qingyang. Princess Yongtai. Li Han looked dumbly at his brothers and sisters who came forward to hand over the booklet in their hands to the teacher. He was instantly stunned. Liar, all liars. After a moment his expression became angry, and when Li Yi looked at him the anger immediately turned into fear. Your Royal Highness Prince Jean, what about you? When this demonic voice came, Prince Jean could not help but shiver. He no longer considered the problem of trust between people, because that thin booklet had been torn up by him along with the textbook a few months ago. Chapter 429. Yu. During the lesson Prince Jin's face turned blue as he pointed to his brothers and sisters. You are all liars. I didn't lie to you. Princess Xianxia moved a small stool and sat down next to the ice mirror. If you hadn't reminded me, I would have forgotten that teacher left me homework before he left. But it's not difficult, I finished it all in 2 hours. Li Xiang, what about you? Princess Xianxia was someone he couldn't afford to offend. Li Han didn't dare to say anything in front of her, so he turned to look at another prince and said. Prince Fu. Li Xiang was younger than Li Han and his body was thinner. At this time he was squinting his eyes, leaning against the ice mirror with a look of enjoyment on his face. When he heard Prince Jin's question he innocently said, I didn't write anything, I just copied Princess Xianxia's work. Who asked elder brother to come later than teacher? That's right. We all copied Princess Xianxia's work. Elder brother, if only you came a quarter of an hour earlier. The princes and princesses joined forces and said. Prince Jin's face was twisted. If he knew that the Bowen Palace was so cool he would have run here long ago. But even if he came an hour earlier, it would be of no use, because that thing had already been torn to pieces by him. How could he copy? Fortunately he had used the excuse of lost homework and textbooks to deceive the teacher. Unexpectedly, teacher did not get angry, nor did he make things difficult for him, which made Prince Jean feel a little comforted. This time, Princess Xianxia's homework is very good. Prince Fu, Prince Shou, Princess Anyang, Princess Qingyang. In view of this being the first time, there will be no investigation. If you copy other people's homework in the future, you will get 0 points, Your Royal Highness Prince Jean. Li Yi looked at Prince Jean Li Han and said, losing homework is not an excuse, 0 points. 0 points. Hearing this sentence there was a thunderous sound in Li Han's mind. Revenge, this was definitely revenge. Li Xiang and the others were plagiarizing and they did not rely on their own abilities. He had merely accidentally lost it. Why did they only give him a 0? Li Han's heart was filled with fear when he thought of his name appearing on the wall outside the Bowen Hall. Although he was a brat who wasn't even 10 years old and didn't know what self-respect was, he knew that if news of this got out he would definitely become a joke in the palace. He started to feel regret. He shouldn't have provoked Yongning back then. At this moment in Li Han's eyes, that gentle and weak little girl was like big sister, Princess Xianxia. Both of them were labeled as not to be trifled with. It was impossible for the naughty brats to concentrate for a long time. 2 hours later, Li Yi walked out of the Bowen Hall. Thump. Prince Jean Li Han knelt on the ground and hugged one of Princess Xianxia's legs. With snot and tears he said, Imperial sister, you must help me. In the end he still got a chance, which was to make up for all the homework before tomorrow's class. He didn't even have a textbook. If he couldn't find anyone to help him he would really become a disgrace among the princes. But I have to go out of the palace with Imperial sister to play today. Princess Xianxia looked hesitant. It wasn't easy for her to beg Imperial sister to take her out of the palace. If she helped Li Han familiarize himself with his homework, she could only stay in the palace. Seeing Princess Xianxia's hesitation, Li Han immediately said, Imperial father gave Imperial mother a few night amingzu last time. I'll go ask Imperial mother and when I get it I'll immediately give it to you. Girls always couldn't resist the temptation of those shiny things. Thinking that she still needed a few night amingzu decorations in her room, so that it wouldn't be too dark at night, Princess Xianxia was even more moved. After thinking for a long time she nodded and reached out a hand to Li Han saying, at least 5. Be careful, move it. Li Yi stood at the entrance of a palace and pointed at the guards who were moving a square foot of ice into the palace. Princess Yongning stood at the entrance of the palace and stared blankly at the scene in front of her. Several palace maids and eunuchs immediately put the ice into the ice mirror. In such hot weather, if they didn't store it as soon as possible, it wouldn't take long for the ice to melt. Li only recently learned about the ice mirror. It was a huge bronze container that looked like a giant cauldron. In the summer it could be used as a refrigerator or an air conditioner. It was very convenient to use. Zhou Xian said that the hidden ice in the palace was almost used up. He definitely wouldn't be so extravagant as to let all the princes and princesses waste ice like this. Everyone's share was pitifully small. Even so, the young lady still gave him the only small piece of ice she had. These were Li Yi's rewards. With these ice cubes she should be much more comfortable in the palace. As for the old emperor and his concubines, who cared? Even if he moved all the ice in the house, it wouldn't be enough for them. It was better to let them find a way themselves. Right, I have to go. I'll see you tomorrow. Seeing that they had moved all the ice cubes, Li Yi waved at Yongning and turned to walk out of the palace. He actually didn't have any porridge to eat today, so he was still hungry. When he passed by the dining hall, he habitually went in and took 2 cucumbers. Everything went smoothly these 2 days. Even Mississippi Lu admitted her mistake for the first time. Although the process was a little complicated, the long Cold War was finally over. The weather that could kill people in the past few days did not seem to be, because the emperor's immorality had incurred the wrath of the heavens. A sudden heavy rain took away the heat as well as many rumors and slanders. Even the layer of haze that shrouded the capital seemed to have been washed away by the rain. The emperor's health improved. The morning court resumed and the court gradually returned to peace and order. However, the few shops in the capital named Rui Workshop weren't peaceful. The weather wasn't as hot as it was a few days ago, but it was still midsummer. Almost all the commoners in the capital loved the mung bean smoothie produced by Rui Workshop. Those with a bit of status felt that a bowl of smoothie that cost 10 copper coins was not worthy of their status. They loved iced grape wine. They didn't mind even if they had to pay 20% more for it. The few newly opened ice-making workshops were also booming. Even though each household could only buy a limited amount, the orders were still queued up for 7 days. Even Fong and the others were so busy that they couldn't go home every day. Li Yi, on the other hand, had nothing to do. He flipped through the gift list in his hands. These were all gifts from the imperial physicians who came to visit. He only sat at home for a quarter of an hour, but he brought half a cart full of gifts. He even kept saying that it was a small gift, and hoped that the owner wouldn't mind. They were all people who understood etiquette. He sent some top-notch medicinal herbs to the old madam. The old madam might need them. This pair of jade bracelets could be given to Duanwu. He saw her staring at the bracelets on Rui's wrist in a daze. As for Mississippi Lu and Xiao Huan, they had already picked out the ones they liked on the day the gifts were delivered. This phoenix hairpin was small and exquisite. It should be very beautiful on Yongning's head. When Li Yi put away the phoenix hairpin in the palace, that thin figure was sitting in front of the corridor, looking forward to the arrival of a new day. In another palace, a concubine looked at her son who was crying and rolling on the ground. She waved her hand helplessly. All right, don't cry. It's just a few night Amingzu pills. I'll give them to you, okay? Chapter 430. Everyone has done a good job in the past few days. As a reward, you can rest for 2 days. In the Bowen Hall, as soon as Li Yi's voice fell, the princes and princesses cheered excitedly. They had long been tired of 5 consecutive days of mathematics lessons. When they thought about having 2 days of free time, they naturally couldn't help but be overjoyed. Your Highness Prince Jean, don't forget to memorize the multiplication formula in these 2 days. When Li Yi walked out of the hall, he reminded Prince Jean again. Although Prince Jean was a little stubborn, he had a good comprehension ability. He was a good seedling and was worthy of being cultivated. After a while, Li Han walked out of the hall with a dejected look on his face. It formed a sharp contrast with the other cheering princes and princesses. While the other siblings were still learning about the plus and dash, he had already left them far behind. The plus was actually a new symbol when it was tilted, and it took him 2 whole days to understand the meaning of the symbol. He completed the homework that belonged to him and offset the sin of not completing the homework last time. On the honor roll at the entrance of the Bowen Hall, there were already 5 little red flowers behind royal sister Xianxia's name. He didn't even have one. He couldn't waste these 2 days. If he memorized the multiplication formula, he would get 2 little red flowers and jump to the top 5 of the honor roll. Prince Jean gritted his teeth and looked at his brothers and sisters who were running around like wild horses. He silently turned around and walked back to the Bowen Hall. Because of the several new ice-making workshops in the capital, the ice source in the palace wasn't in short supply. However, the ice-making workshops had a limited amount of ice. In addition to supplying the palace, they also had to deal with the nobles in the capital. Therefore, in the palace, although the princes and concubines were given more ice every day, it was still far from enough. Of course, that was except for Princess Yongning. Every day, Li Yi would send someone to deliver a large amount of ice before noon. Then after class he would go to Yongning's place to sit for a while and talk to her. Of course he was talking to himself. Even though he could feel her joy, he never heard her speak. This made Li Yi a little depressed. Well, it's getting late. I have to go. I won't come to the palace tomorrow or the day after. I won't see you until the day after. Li Yi gently touched her head, stood up and walked out of the palace. When he passed by the Bowen Hall, he saw Xianxia and the 2 little princesses playing in the shade. When she saw him, she seemed a little angry and didn't even say hello. In the past few days, Li Yi also felt that there was something wrong with her in class. He didn't know what happened to this black-bellied loli. After thinking about it carefully, he found that he really did not provoke her, so he put this matter to the back of his mind. Humph! Before he took 2 steps, a cold snort suddenly came from behind. Li Yi turned around and saw Princess Xianxia following behind him with her hands behind her back. She kicked her little steps and pouted. She stared at him fiercely with her big eyes. This little tiger look had never been seen since Li Yi became her mathematics teacher. Li Yi looked back at her and asked, "What's wrong? Who provoked the noble princess?" The 2-faced loli glared at him and said bitterly, "Me." Li Yi pointed to himself and then looked at Princess Xianxia. He made hot pot for her, taught her how to cook and even gave her a little red flower. Although she was young, did she have a conscience to say such words? "It's you." The arrogant loli pointed at him and showed her 2 tiger teeth. She didn't look fierce, but she was very cute. "What's wrong with me?" Seeing her appearance, Li Yi was even more surprised. "You send so many ice cubes to Yongning every day and cook delicious food for her. Do you know that I can't sleep because of the heat at night?" Princess Xianxia looked at Li Yi and said with some grievance. Tears even began to flash in her big eyes. A few days ago she saw that teacher sent a lot of ice cubes to Yongning's palace. It was more than the ice cubes that father gave them every day. It was so much that Yongning didn't feel hot when she slept at night. However, she was also very hot. Imperial father had given her and Imperial mother 2 little ice. It was impossible for them to last until night. Every night she would toss and turn in the heat, finding it hard to sleep. She thought that since her teacher had already given Yongning so much ice, it should be her turn next. She knew teacher earlier than Yongning. Although at that time she thought he was a bad guy who snatched food from her, didn't she change her impression later? But the next day teacher only sent Yongning ice cubes. She thought it would be the 3rd day, the 4th day. Then there was no then. She felt a little aggrieved and sad. She knew teacher first, and shouldn't she be the one that teacher liked the most? She was like a child who lost the love of her elders. He felt very sad. She even wanted to ask teacher personally if he liked Yongning more than him. Looking at the arrogant Lolita's big eyes that were covered with a layer of mist, even Li Yi was a little stunned. Could it be that she was jealous? To be honest, among these little princesses and princes, other than Yongning, he liked Princess Xianxia the most. Although she looked arrogant on the surface, she was obedient and sensible on the inside. As for Yongning, she always had a special aura that attracted him to get close to her. Perhaps it was because the young lady's tragic life had aroused his compassion, or perhaps it was because it evoked some similar memories deep in his heart, which triggered something similar to the desire to protect her. But he didn't expect that these actions in the eyes of Princess Xianxia represented another meaning. The young lady's heart was actually so sensitive. Li Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "Okay, don't cry first. I'll get them to send ice when I get back. You can send someone to the palace gate to receive it later." At first, Li Yi felt that with so many people in the palace, he couldn't afford to offend any of the concubines. It would be a big problem for him to choose who to send. So, other than Yongning, he didn't send anyone else and let them buy it from the ice-making workshop. But seeing the arrogant Lolita who was about to cry, he had to change his mind. Concubine Yen was with her, so he only needed to send one. Emingzu probably wouldn't be lacking either. If he sent one to her daughter, he would have to send one to her mother. The Empress would also get one. Concubine Cui was the king of Shu's mother, so she would be better off. As for the others, he wasn't familiar with them. Who wants it? The arrogant Lolita snorted angrily. She glared at Li Yi and ran away. Li Yi looked at her cheerful steps and thought to himself, although she said she didn't want it, if he didn't send it, the next time they met she would immediately become a little tiger again. These days Lolitas were fierce. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.